Why, with no one. Section 1 of White Nights and Other Stories by Fyodor Dostoevsky. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. White Nights, a sentimental story from the Diary of a Dreamer by Fyodor Dostoevsky. Translated from the Russian by Constance Garnett. Recording by Jennifer Ann Chevelle. First Night. It was a wonderful night, such a night as is only possible when we are young, dear reader. The sky was so starry, so bright that, looking at it, one could not help asking oneself whether ill-humored and capricious people could live under such a sky. That is a youthful question too, dear reader, very youthful, but may the Lord put it more frequently into your heart. Speaking of capricious and ill-humored people, I cannot help recalling my moral condition all that day. From early morning I had been oppressed by a strange despondency. It suddenly seemed to me that I was lonely, that everyone was forsaking me and going away from me. Of course, anyone is entitled to ask who everyone was, for though I had been living almost 8 years in Petersburg, I had hardly an acquaintance. But what did I want with acquaintances? I was acquainted with all Petersburg as it was. That was why I felt as though they were all deserting me when all Petersburg packed up and went to its summer villa. I felt afraid of being left alone, and for 3 whole days I wandered about the town in profound dejection, not knowing what to do with myself. Whether I walked in the Nevsky, went to the gardens, or sauntered on the embankment, there was not one face of those I had been accustomed to meet at the same time and place all the year. They, of course, do not know me, but I know them. I know them intimately. I have almost made a study of their faces, and am delighted when they are gay, and downcast when they are under a cloud. I have almost struck up a friendship with one old man whom I meet every blessed day at the same hour in Fontanka. Such a grave, pensive countenance! He is always whispering to himself and brandishing his left arm, while in his right hand he holds a long, gnarled stick with a gold knob. He even notices me, and takes a warm interest in me. If I happen not to be at a certain time in the same spot in Fontanka, I am certain he feels disappointed. That is how it is that we almost bow to each other, especially when we are both in good humour. The other day, when we had not seen each other for 2 days and met on the 3rd, we were actually touching our hats, but, realizing in time, dropped our hands and passed each other with a look of interest. I know the houses too. As I walk along, they seem to run forward in the streets, to look out at me from every window, and almost to say, "Good morning, how do you do? I am quite well, thank God, and I am to have a new story in May." Or, "How are you? I am being redecorated tomorrow." Or, "I was almost burnt down and had such a fright," and so on. I have my favourites among them. Some are dear friends. One of them intends to be treated by the architect this summer. I shall go every day on purpose to see that the operation is not a failure. God forbid. But I shall never forget an incident with a very pretty little house of a light pink colour. It was such a charming little brick house. It looked so hospitably at me, and so proudly at its ungainly neighbours, that my heart rejoiced whenever I happened to pass it. Suddenly, last week, I walked along the street, and when I looked at my friend I heard a plaintive, "They're painting me yellow." The villains! The barbarians! They had spared nothing, neither columns nor cornices, and my poor little friend was as yellow as a canary. It almost made me bilious. And to this day I have not had the courage to visit my poor disfigured friend, painted the colour of the Celestial Empire. So now you understand, reader, in what sense I am acquainted with all Petersburg. I have mentioned already that I had felt worried for 3 whole days before I guessed the cause of my uneasiness. And I felt ill at ease in the street. This one had gone, and that one had gone, and what had become of the other? And at home I did not feel like myself either. For 2 evenings I was puzzling my brains to think of what was amiss in my corner, why I felt so uncomfortable in it. And in perplexity I scanned my grimy green walls, my ceiling covered with a spider's web, the growth of which Matrona has so successfully encouraged. I looked over all my furniture, examined every chair, wondering whether the trouble lay there. For if one chair is not standing in the same position as it stood the day before, I am not myself. I looked at the window, but it was all in vain. I was not a bit the better for it. I even bethought me to send for Matrona, and was giving her some fatherly admonitions in regard to the spider's webs and sluttishness in general, but she simply stared at me in amazement and went away without saying a word, so that the spider's web is comfortably hanging in its place to this day. I only at last, this morning, realized what was wrong. Why, they are giving me the slip, and making off to their summer villas. Forgive the triviality of the expression, but I am in no mood for fine language. For everything that had been in Petersburg had gone or was going away for the holidays. For every respectable gentleman of dignified appearance who took a cab was at once transformed, in my eyes, into a respectable head of a household, who, after his daily duties were over, was making his way to the bosom of his family, to the summer villa. For all the passers-by had now quite a peculiar air, which seemed to say to everyone they met, "We are only here for the moment, gentlemen, and in another 2 hours we shall be going off to the summer villa." If a window opened after delicate fingers, white as snow, had tapped upon the pane, and the head of a pretty girl was thrust out, calling to a street seller with pots of flowers at once on the spot, I fancied that those flowers were being bought not simply in order to enjoy the flowers and the spring in stuffy town lodgings, but because they would all be very soon moving into the country, and could take the flowers with them. What is more, I made such progress in my new peculiar sort of investigation that I could distinguish correctly from the mere air of each in what summer villa he was living. The inhabitants of Kameny and Abdikarsky Islands, or of the Peterhof Road, were marked by the studied elegance of their manner, their fashionable summer suits, and the fine carriages in which they drove to town. Visitors to Pargovelo, and places further away, impressed one at first sight by their reasonable and dignified air. The tripper to Krestovsky Island could be recognized by his look of irrepressible gaiety. If I chanced to meet a long procession of wagoners walking lazily with the reins in their hands, beside wagons loaded with regular mountains of furniture, tables, chairs, ottomans and sofas, and domestic utensils of all sorts, frequently with a decrepit cook sitting on top of it all, guarding her master's property as though it were the apple of her eye, or if I saw boats heavily loaded with household goods crawling along the Neva or Fontanka to the Black River or the islands, the wagons and the boats were multiplied 10-fold, 100-fold, in my eyes. I fancied that everything was astir and moving. Everything was going in regular caravans to the summer villas. It seemed as though Petersburg threatened to become a wilderness, so that at last I felt ashamed, mortified, and sad that I had nowhere to go for the holidays, and no reason to go away. I was ready to go away with every wagon, to drive off with every gentleman of respectable appearance who took a cab, but no one, absolutely no one, invited me. It seemed they had forgotten me, as though really I were a stranger to them. I took long walks, succeeding, as I usually did, in quite forgetting where I was, when I suddenly found myself at the city gates. Instantly I felt light-hearted, and I passed the barrier and walked between cultivated fields and meadows, unconscious of fatigue, and feeling only all over as though a burden were falling off my soul. All the passers-by gave me such friendly looks that they seemed almost greeting me. They all seemed so pleased at something. They were all smoking cigars, every one of them, and I felt pleased as I never had before. It was as though I had suddenly found myself in Italy. So strong was the effect of nature upon a half-sick townsman like me, almost stifling between city walls. There is something inexpressibly touching in nature around Petersburg, when at the approach of spring she puts forth all her might, all the powers bestowed on her by heaven, when she breaks into leaf, decks herself out, and spangles herself with flowers. Somehow I cannot help being reminded of a frail, consumptive girl, at whom one sometimes looks with compassion, sometimes with sympathetic love, whom sometimes one simply does not notice, though suddenly, in one instant, she becomes, as though by chance, inexplicably lovely and exquisite, and, impressed and intoxicated, one cannot help asking oneself what power made those sad, pensive eyes flash with such fire? What summoned the blood to those pale, wan cheeks? What bathed with passion those soft features? What set that bosom heaving? What so suddenly called strength, life, and beauty into the poor girl's face, making it gleam with such a smile, kindle with such bright, sparkling laughter? You look around, you seek for someone, you conjecture, but the moment passes, and next day you meet, maybe, the same pensive and preoccupied look as before, the same pale face, the same meek and timid movements, and even signs of remorse, traces of immortal anguish and regret for the fleeting distraction. And you grieve that the momentary beauty has faded so soon, never to return, that it flashed upon you so treacherously, so vainly. Grieve because you had not even time to love her. And yet my night was better than my day. This was how it happened. I came back to the town very late, and it had struck 10 as I was going towards my lodgings. My way lay along the canal embankment, where at that hour you never meet a soul. It is true that I live in a very remote part of the town. I walked along singing, for when I am happy I am always humming to myself, like every happy man who has no friend or acquaintance with whom to share his joy. Suddenly I had a most unexpected adventure. Leaning on the canal railing stood a woman with her elbows on the rail. She was apparently looking with great attention at the muddy water of the canal. She was wearing a very charming yellow hat and a jaunty little black mantle. "She's a girl, and I'm sure she's dark," I thought. She did not seem to hear my footsteps, and did not even stir when I passed by with bated breath and a loudly throbbing heart. Strange, I thought. She must be deeply absorbed in something. And all at once I stopped as though petrified. I heard a muffled sob. Yes, I was not mistaken. The girl was crying, and a minute later I heard sob after sob. Good heavens! My heart sank, and, timid as I was with women, yet this was such a moment! I turned, took a step towards her, and should certainly have pronounced the word "Madam," if I had not known that that exclamation has been uttered 1,000 times in every Russian society novel. It was only that reflection stopped me. But while I was seeking for a word, the girl came to herself, looked round, started, cast down her eyes, and slipped by me along the embankment. I at once followed her, but she, divining this, left the embankment, crossed the road, and walked along the pavement. I dared not cross the street after her. My heart was fluttering like a captured bird. All at once a chance came to my aid. Along the same side of the pavement there suddenly came into sight, not far from the girl, a gentleman in evening dress, of dignified years, though by no means of dignified carriage. He was staggering and cautiously leaning against the wall. The girl flew straight as an arrow, with the timid haste one sees in all girls who do not want anyone to volunteer to accompany them home at night, and no doubt the staggering gentleman would not have pursued her if my good luck had not prompted him. Suddenly, without a word to anyone, the gentleman set off and flew full speed in pursuit of my unknown lady. She was racing like the wind, but the staggering gentleman was overtook her. The girl uttered a shriek, and I bless my luck for the excellent knotted stick which happened on that occasion to be in my right hand. In a flash I was on the other side of the street. In a flash the obtrusive gentleman had taken in the position, had grasped the irresistible argument, fallen back without a word, and only when we were very far away protested against my action in rather vigorous language. But his words hardly reached us. "Give me your arm," I said to the girl, "and he won't dare to annoy us further." She took my arm without a word, still trembling with excitement and terror. Oh, obtrusive gentleman, how I blessed you at that moment! I stole a glance at her. She was very charming and dark. I had guessed right. On her black eyelashes there still glistened a tear. From her recent terror or her former grief, I don't know. But there was already a gleam of a smile on her lips. She too stole a glance at me, faintly blushed, and looked down. "There, you see? Why did you drive me away? If I had been there, nothing would have happened."
"But I do not know you. I thought that you too—"
"Why, do you know me now?"
"A little. Here, for instance, why are you trembling?"
"Oh, you are right at the first guess," I answered, delighted that my girl had intelligence. That is never out of place in company with beauty. "Yes, from the first glance you have guessed the sort of man you have to do with." "Precisely. I am shy with women. I am agitated, I don't deny it, as much so as you were a minute ago when that gentleman alarmed you. I am in some alarm now. It's like a dream, and I never guessed, even in my sleep, that I should ever talk with any woman."
"What? Really?"
"Yes. If my arm trembles, it is because it has never been held by a pretty little hand like yours. I am a complete stranger to women. That is, I have never been used to them. You see, I am alone. I don't even know how to talk to them. Here, I don't know now whether I have not said something silly to you. Tell me frankly, I assure you beforehand, that I am not quick to take offence."
"No, nothing, quite the contrary. And if you insist on my speaking frankly, I will tell you that women like such timidity. And if you want to know more, I like it too, and I won't drive you away till I get home."
"You will make me," I said, breathless with delight, "lose my timidity, and then farewell to all my chances?"
"Chances? What chances of what? That's not so nice."
"I beg your pardon. I am sorry. It was a slip of the tongue, but how can you expect one at such a moment to have no desire—"
"To be liked, huh?"
"Well, yes, but do, for goodness' sake, be kind. Think what I am. Here, I am 26, and I have never seen anyone. How can I speak, well, tactfully, and to the point? It will seem better to you when I have told you everything openly. I don't know how to be silent when my heart is speaking. Well, never mind. Believe me, not one woman. Never, never. No acquaintance of any sort. And I do nothing but dream, every day, that at last I shall meet someone. Oh, if only you knew how often I have been in love in that way."
"How? With whom?"
"Why, with no one. With an ideal. With the one that I dream of in my sleep. I make up regular romances in my dreams. Ah, you don't know me. It's true, of course, I have met 2 or 3 women, but what sort of women were they? They were all landladies, that. But I shall make you laugh if I tell you that I have several times thought of speaking, just simply speaking, to some aristocratic lady in the street, when she is alone, I need hardly say. Speaking to her, of course, timidly, respectfully, passionately, telling her that I am perishing in solitude, begging her not to send me away, saying that I have no chance of making the acquaintance of any woman,
impressing upon her that it is a positive duty for a woman not to repulse so timid a prayer from such a luckless man as me. That, in fact, all I ask is that she should say 2 or 3 sisterly words with sympathy, should not repulse me at first sight, should take me on trust and listen to what I say, should laugh at me if she likes, encourage me, say 2 words to me, only 2 words, even though we never meet again afterwards. But you are laughing, however. That is why I am telling you."
"Don't be vexed. I am only laughing at your being your own enemy. And if you had tried, you would have succeeded, perhaps, even though it had been in the street. The simpler the better. No kind-hearted woman, unless she were stupid or, still more, vexed about something at the moment, could bring herself to send you away without those 2 words which you asked for so timidly. But what am I saying? Of course she would take you for a madman. I was judging by myself. I know a good deal about other people's lives."
"Oh, thank you," I cried. "You don't know what you have done for me now."
I am glad. But tell me, how did you find out that I was the sort of woman with whom you think worthy of attention and friendship? In fact, not a landlady, as you say. What made you decide to come up to me?"
"What made me? But you were alone. That gentleman was too insolent. It's night. You must admit that it was a duty."
No, I mean before, on the other side. You know you meant to come up to me."
"On the other side? Really, I don't know how to answer. I'm afraid to. Do you know, I have been happy today. I walked along singing. I went out into the country. I have never had such happy moments. You? Perhaps it was my fancy. Forgive me for referring to it. I fancied you were crying, and I could not bear to hear it. It made my heart ache. Oh, my goodness! Surely I might be troubled about you? Surely there was no harm in feeling brotherly compassion for you? I beg your pardon, I said compassion. Well, in short, surely you would not be offended by my involuntary impulse to go up to you?"
"Stop, that's enough. Don't talk of it," said the girl, looking down and pressing my hand. "It was my fault for having spoken of it, but I am glad I was not mistaken in you. But here I am home. I must go down this turning. It's 2 steps from here. Good-bye. Thank you."
Surely you don't mean that we shall never see each other again? Surely this is not to be the end?"
"You see," said the girl, laughing, "at first you only wanted 2 words, and now... However, I won't say anything. Perhaps we shall meet."
"I shall come here tomorrow," I said. "Oh, forgive me, I am already making demands."
"Yes, you are not very patient. You are almost insisting."
Listen," I interrupted her. "Forgive me if I tell you something else. I tell you what, I can't help coming here tomorrow. I am a dreamer. I have so little real life that I look upon such moments as this now as so rare that I cannot help going over such moments again in my dreams. I shall be dreaming of you all night, a whole week, a whole year. I shall certainly come here tomorrow, just here to this place, just at the same hour, and I shall be happy remembering today. This place is dear to me already. I have already 2 or 3 such places in Petersburg. I once shed tears over memories. Like you. Who knows, perhaps you were weeping 10 minutes ago over some memory. But forgive me, I have forgotten myself again. Perhaps you have once been particularly happy here."
"Very good," said the girl. "Perhaps I will come here tomorrow too, at 10 o'clock. I see that I can't forbid you. The fact is, I have to be here. Don't imagine that I am making an appointment with you. I tell you beforehand that I have to be here on my own account. But, well, I tell you straight out, I don't mind if you do come. To begin with, something unpleasant might happen as it did today, But never mind that. In short, I should simply like to see you, to say 2 words to you. Only, mind, you must not think the worst of me now. Don't think I make appointments so lightly. I shouldn't make it, except that... But let that be my secret. Only a compact beforehand." "A compact? Speak, tell me all beforehand. I agree to anything, I am ready for anything," I cried, delighted. "I answer for myself, I will be obedient, respectful. You know me." "It's just because I do know you that I ask you to come tomorrow," said the girl, laughing. "I know you perfectly. But mind, you will come on the condition, in the first place... Only be good, do what I ask. You see, I speak frankly. You won't fall in love with me. That's impossible, I assure you. I am ready for friendship. Here's my hand. But you mustn't fall in love with me. I beg you." "I swear!" I cried, gripping her hand. "Hush, don't swear. I know you are ready to flare up like gunpowder. Don't think ill of me for saying so. If only you knew. I, too, have no one to whom I can say a word, whose advice I can ask. Of course, one does not look for an adviser in the street, but you are an exception. I know you, as though we have been friends for 20 years. You won't deceive me, will you?" "You will see. The only thing is, I don't know how I am going to survive the next 24 hours." "Sleep soundly. Good night. And remember that I have trusted you already." "But you exclaimed so nicely just now. Surely one can't be held responsible for every feeling, even for brotherly sympathy. Do you know, that was so nicely said, that the idea struck me at once that I might confide in you." "For God's sake, do! But what about? What is it?" "Wait till tomorrow. Meanwhile, let that be a secret. So much the better for you. It will give it a faint flavour of romance. Perhaps I will tell you tomorrow, and perhaps not. I will talk to you a little more beforehand. We will get to know each other better."
"Oh, yes, I will tell you all about myself tomorrow. But what has happened? It is as though a miracle has befallen me. My God, where am I? Come, tell me, aren't you glad that you were not angry and did not drive me away at the first moment, as any other woman would have done? In 2 minutes you have made me happy forever. Yes, happy. Who knows? Perhaps you have reconciled me with myself, solved my doubts. Perhaps such moments come upon me. But there, I will tell you all about it tomorrow. You shall know everything, everything."
"Very well, I consent. You shall begin."
"Agreed."
"Good-bye. Till tomorrow."
"Till tomorrow." And we parted. I walked about all night. I could not make up my mind to go home. I was so happy. Tomorrow! End of first night. Recorded by Jennifer Ann Chevelle. Visit my YouTube channel at www.youtube.com/messengerangel. Recorded in Odenton, Maryland on September 7th, 2010.
Section 4 of White Nights and Other Stories by Fyodor Dostoevsky. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. White Nights. A sentimental story from the Diary of a Dreamer by Fyodor Dostoevsky. Translated from the Russian by Constance Garnett. Third night. Today was a gloomy, rainy day without a glimmer of sunlight, like the old age before me. I am oppressed by such strange thoughts, such gloomy sensations. Questions still so obscure to me are crowding into my brain, and I seem to have neither power nor will to settle them. It's not for me to settle all this. Today we shall not meet. Yesterday, when we said goodbye, the clouds began gathering over the sky and a mist rose. I said that tomorrow it would be a bad day. She made no answer. She did not want to speak against her wishes. For her, that day was bright and clear. Not one cloud should obscure her happiness. "If it rains, we shall not see each other," she said. "I shall not come." I thought that she would not notice today's rain, and yet she has not come. Yesterday was our third interview, our third white night. But how fine joy and happiness makes anyone! How brimming over with love the heart is! One seems longing to pour out one's whole heart. One wants everything to be gay, everything to be laughing, and how infectious that joy is! There was such a softness in her words, such a kindly feeling in her heart towards me yesterday. How solicitous and friendly she was, how tenderly she tried to give me courage. Oh, the coquetry of happiness! While I took it all for the genuine thing. I thought that she... But, my God, how could I have thought it? How could I have been so blind, when everything had been taken by another already, when nothing was mine, when, in fact, her very tenderness to me, her anxiety, her love, yes, love for me, was nothing else but joy at the thought of seeing another man so soon, desire to include me too in her happiness? When he did not come, when we waited in vain, she frowned, she grew timid and discouraged. Her movements, her words, were no longer so light, so playful, so gay, and, strange to say, she redoubled her attentiveness to me, as though instinctively desiring to lavish on me what she desired for herself, so anxiously, if her wishes were not accomplished. My Nastenka was so downcast, so dismayed, that I think she realized at last that I loved her, and was sorry for my poor love. So when we are unhappy, we feel the unhappiness of others more. Feeling is not destroyed, but concentrated. I went to meet her with a full heart, and was all impatience. I had no presentiment that I should feel as I do now, that it would not all end happily. She was beaming with pleasure. She was expecting an answer. The answer was himself. He was to come, to run at her call. She arrived a whole hour before I did. At first she giggled at everything, laughed at every word I said. I began talking, but relapsed into silence. "Do you know why I am so glad?" she said. "So glad to look at you? Why I like you so much today?" "Well?" I asked, and my heart began throbbing. "I like you because you have not fallen in love with me. You know that some men in your place would have been pestering and worrying me, would have been sighing and miserable, while you are so nice." Then she wrung my hand so hard that I almost cried out. She laughed. "Goodness, what a friend you are," she began gravely a minute later. "God sent you to me. What would have happened to me if you had not been with me now? How disinterested you are. How truly you care for me. When I am married we will be great friends, more than brother and sister. I shall care almost as I do for him." I felt horribly sad at the moment, yet something like laughter was stirring in my soul. "You are very much upset," I said. "You are frightened. You think he won't come." "Oh dear," she answered, "if I were less happy, I believe I should cry at your lack of faith, at your reproaches. However, you have made me think, and have given me a lot to think about, but I shall think later. And now I will own that you are right. Yes, I am somehow not myself. I am all suspense, and feel everything as it were too lightly. But hush, that's enough about feelings." At that moment we heard footsteps, and in the darkness we saw a figure coming towards us. We both started. She almost cried out. I dropped her hand and made a movement as though to walk away, but we were mistaken. It was not he. What are you afraid of? Why did you let go of my hand?" she said, giving it to me again. "Come, what is it? We will meet him together. I want him to see how fond we are of each other." "How fond we are of each other!" I cried. "Oh, Nastenka, Nastenka," I thought, "how much you have told me in that saying. Such fondness at certain moments makes the heart cold and the soul heavy. Your hand is cold, mine burns like fire. How blind you are, Nastenka! Oh, how unbearable a happy person is sometimes. But I could not be angry with you." At last my heart was too full. "Listen, Nastenka," I cried. "Do you know how it has been with me all day?" "Why? How? Tell me quickly. Why have you said nothing all this time?" "To begin with, Nastenka, when I had carried out all your commissions, given the letter, gone to see your good friends, then I went home and went to bed."
"Is that all?"
she interrupted, laughing. "Yes, almost all," I answered, restraining myself, for foolish tears were already starting into my eyes. "I woke an hour before our appointment, and yet, as it were, I had not been asleep. I don't know what happened to me. I came to tell you all about it, feeling as though time were standing still, feeling as though one feeling must remain with me from that time forever, feeling as though 1 minute must go on for all eternity, and as though all life had come to a standstill for me. When I woke up, it seemed as though some musical motive, long familiar, heard somewhere in the past, forgotten and voluptuously sweet, had come back to me now. It seemed to me that it had been clamoring at my heart all my life, and only now—"
"Oh, my goodness, Nastenka interrupted. "What does all that mean? I don't understand a word."
"All, Nastenka. I wanted somehow to convey to you that strange impression," I began in a plaintive voice, in which there still lay hid a hope, though a very faint one.
"Leave off, hush!"
she said, and in one instant the sly puss had guessed. Suddenly she became extraordinarily talkative, gay, mischievous. She took my arm, laughed, wanted me to laugh too, and every confused word I uttered evoked from her prolonged ringing laughter. I began to feel angry. She had suddenly begun flirting.
"Do you know," she began, "I feel a little vexed that you are not in love with me. There's no understanding human nature. But all the same, Mr. Unapproachable, you cannot blame me for being so simple. I tell you everything, whatever foolish thought comes into my head."
"Listen, that's 11, I believe," I said as the slow chime of a bell rang out from a distant tower. She suddenly stopped, left off laughing, and began to count.
"Yes, it's 11,
she said at last in a timid, uncertain voice. I regretted at once that I had frightened her, making her count the strokes, and I cursed myself for my spiteful impulse. I felt sorry for her, and did not know how to atone for what I had done. I began comforting her, seeking for reasons for his not coming, advancing various arguments, proofs. No one could have been easier to deceive than she was at that moment. And, indeed, anyone at such a moment listens gladly to any consolation, whatever it may be, and is overjoyed if a shadow of excuse can be found. "And indeed it's an absurd thing," I began, warming to my task and admiring the extraordinary clearness of my argument. "Why, he could not have come. You have muddled and confused me, Nastenka, so that I, too, have lost count of the time. Only think, he can scarcely have received the letter. Suppose he is not able to come. Suppose he is going to answer the letter. Could not come before tomorrow. I will go for it as soon as it's light tomorrow, and let you know at once. Consider, there are thousands of possibilities. Perhaps he was not at home when the letter came, and may not have read it even now. Anything may happen, you know."
Yes, said Nastenka. "I did not think of that. Of course, anything may happen," she went on in a tone that offered no opposition,
though some other faraway thought could be heard like a vexatious discord in it. "I tell you what you must do," she said. "You go as early as possible tomorrow morning. And if you get anything, let me know at once. You know where I live, don't you?" And she began repeating her address to me. Then she suddenly became so tender, so solicitous with me. She seemed to listen attentively to what I told her. But when I asked her some question, she was silent, was confused, and turned her head away. I looked into her eyes. Yes, she was crying. "How can you? How can you? Oh, what a baby you are! What childishness! Come, come!" She tried to smile, to calm herself, but her chin was quivering and her bosom was still heaving. "I was thinking about you," she said after a minute's silence. "You are so kind that I should be a stone if I did not feel it. Do you know what has occurred to me now? I was comparing you two. Why isn't he you? Why isn't he like you? He is not as good as you, though I love him more than you." I made no answer. She seemed to expect me to say something. "Of course, it may be that I don't understand him fully yet. You know, I was always, as it were, afraid of him. He was always so grave, as it were, so proud. Of course, I know it's only that he seems like that. I know there's more tenderness in his heart than in mine. I remember how he looked at me when I went in to him. Do you remember? With my bundle? But yet I respect him too much. And doesn't that show that we are not equals?" "No, Nastenka, no," I answered. "It shows that you love him more than anything in the world, and far more than yourself." "Yes, supposing that is so," answered Nastenka naively. "But do you know what strikes me now? Only I am not talking about him now, but speaking generally. All this came into my mind some time ago. Tell me, how is it that we can't all be like brothers together? Why is it that even the best of men always seem to hide something from other people and to keep something back? Why not say straight out what is in one's heart when one knows that one is not speaking idly? As it is, everyone seems harsher than he really is, as though all were afraid of doing injustice to their feelings by being too quick to express them." "Oh, Nastenka, what you say is true, but there are many reasons for that," I broke in, suppressing my own feelings at that moment more than ever. "No, no," she answered with deep feeling. "Here you, for instance, are not like other people. I really don't know how to tell you what I feel, but it seems to me that you, for instance, at the present moment, it seems to me that you are sacrificing something for me," she added, timidly, with a fleeting glance at me. "Forgive me for saying so. I am a simple girl, you know. I have seen very little of life, and I really sometimes don't know how to say things," she added in a voice that quivered with some hidden feeling, while she tried to smile. "But I only wanted to tell you that I am grateful, that I feel it all too. Oh, may God give you happiness for it. What you told me about your dreamer is quite untrue now. That is, I mean, it's not true of you. You are recovering. You are quite a different man from what you described. If you ever fall in love with someone, God give you happiness with her. I won't wish anything for her, for she will be happy with you. I know, I am a woman myself, so you must believe me when I tell you so." She ceased speaking and pressed my hand warmly. I too could not speak without emotion. Some minutes passed. "Yes, it's clear he won't come tonight," she said at last, raising her head. "It's late." "He will come tomorrow," I said in the most firm and convincing tone. "Yes," she added, with no sign of her former depression. "I see for myself now that he could not come till tomorrow. Well, good-bye, till tomorrow. If it rains, perhaps I shall not come, but the day after tomorrow I shall come. I shall come for certain, whatever happens. Be sure to be here. I want to see you. I will tell you everything." And then when we parted she gave me her hand and said, looking at me candidly, We shall always be together, shan't we? Oh, Nastenka, Nastenka, if only you knew how lonely I am now. As soon as it struck 9 o'clock, I could not stay indoors, but put on my things, and went out in spite of the weather. I was there, sitting on our seat. I went to her street, but I felt ashamed, and turned back without looking at their windows, when I was 2 steps from her door. I went home more depressed than I had ever been before. What a damp, dreary day! If it had been fine, I should have walked about all night. But tomorrow she will tell me everything. The letter has not come today, however. But that was to be expected. They are together by now. End of third night.
Section 8 of White Nights and Other Stories by Fyodor Dostoevsky. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Notes from Underground by Fyodor Dostoevsky. Translated from the Russian by Constance Garnett. Part 1. Underground. Chapter 7. But these are all golden dreams. Oh, tell me, who was it first announced, who was it first proclaimed, that man only does nasty things because he does not know his own interests, and that if he were enlightened, if his eyes were opened to his real normal interests, man would at once cease to do nasty things, would at once become good and noble, because, being enlightened and understanding his real advantage, he would see his own advantage in the good and nothing else. And we all know that not one man can, consciously, act against his own interests. Consequently, so to say, through necessity, he would begin doing good. Oh, the babe! Oh, the pure innocent child! Why, in the first place, when in all these thousands of years has there been a time when man has acted only from his own interest? What is to be done with the millions of facts that bear witness that men consciously, that is, fully understanding their real interests, have left them in the background and have rushed headlong on another path, to meet peril and danger, compelled to this course by nobody and by nothing but, as it were, simply disliking the beaten track, and have obstinately, wilfully struck out another difficult, absurd way, seeking it almost in the darkness. So I suppose this obstinacy and perversity were pleasanter to them than any advantage. Advantage? What is advantage? And will you take it upon yourself to define with perfect accuracy in what the advantage of man consists? And what if it so happens that a man's advantage sometimes not only may, but even must, consist in his desiring in certain cases what is harmful to himself and not advantageous? And if so, if there can be such a case, the whole principle falls into dust. What do you think? Are there such cases? You laugh. Laugh away, gentlemen, but only answer me. Have man's advantages been reckoned up with perfect certainty? Are there not some which not only have not been included, but cannot possibly be included under any classification? You see, you gentlemen have, to the best of my knowledge, taken your whole register of human advantages from the averages of statistical figures and politico-economical formulas. Your advantages are prosperity, wealth, freedom, peace, and so on and so on. So that the man who should, for instance, go openly and knowingly in opposition to all that list, would, to your thinking, and indeed mine too, of course, be an obscurantist or an absolute madman. Would not he? But you know, this is what is surprising. Why does it so happen that all these statisticians, sages, and lovers of humanity, when they reckon up human advantages, invariably leave one out? They don't even take it into their reckoning in the form in which it should be taken, and the whole reckoning depends upon that. It would be no great matter, they would simply have to take it, this advantage, and add it to the list. But the trouble is that this strange advantage does not fall under any classification, and is not in place in any list. I have a friend, for instance. Gentlemen, but of course he is your friend too. And indeed there is no one, to whom he is not a friend. When he prepares for any undertaking, this gentleman immediately explains to you, elegantly and clearly, exactly how he must act in accordance with the laws of reason and truth. What is more, he will talk to you with excitement and passion of the true normal interests of man. With irony he will upbraid the short-sighted fools who do not understand their own interests, nor the true significance of virtue. And within a quarter of an hour, without any sudden outside provocation, but simply through something inside him which is stronger than all his interests, he will go off on quite a different tack. That is, act in direct opposition to what he has just been saying about himself, in opposition to the laws of reason, in opposition to his own advantage, in fact, in opposition to everything. I warn you that my friend is a compound personality, and therefore it is difficult to blame him as an individual. The fact is, gentlemen, it seems there must really exist something that is dearer to almost every man than his greatest advantages. Or, not to be illogical, there is a most advantageous advantage, the very one omitted of which we spoke just now, which is more important and more advantageous than all other advantages, for the sake of which a man, if necessary, is ready to act in opposition to all laws, that is, in opposition to reason, honour, peace, prosperity, in fact, in opposition to all those excellent and useful things, if only he can attain that fundamental, most advantageous advantage which is dearer to him than all. Yes, but it's advantage all the same, you will retort. But excuse me, I'll make the point clear, and it is not a case of playing upon words. What matters is that this advantage is remarkable from the very fact that it breaks down all our classifications, and continually shatters every system constructed by lovers of mankind for the benefit of mankind. In fact, it upsets everything. But before I mention this advantage to you, I want to compromise myself personally, and therefore I boldly declare that all these fine systems, all these theories for explaining to mankind their real normal interests, in order that inevitably striving to pursue these interests they may at once become good and noble, are, in my opinion, so far, mere logical exercises. Yes, logical exercises. Why, to maintain this theory of the regeneration of mankind by means of the pursuit of his own advantage is to my mind almost the same thing as to affirm, for instance, following Buckle, that through civilization mankind becomes softer and consequently less bloodthirsty and less fitted for warfare. Logically, it does seem to follow from his arguments. But man has such a predilection for systems and abstract deductions that he is ready to distort the truth intentionally. He is ready to deny the evidence of his senses only to justify his logic. I take this example because it is the most glaring instance of it. Only look about you. Blood is being spilt in streams, and in the merriest way, as though it were champagne. Take the whole of the 19th century in which Buckle lived. Take Napoleon the Great, and also the present one. Take North America, the Eternal Union. Take the farce of Schleswig-Holstein. And what is it that civilization softens in us? The only gain of civilization for mankind is the greater capacity for variety of sensations, and absolutely nothing more. And through the development of this many-sidedness, man may come to finding enjoyment in bloodshed. In fact, this has already happened to him. Have you noticed that it is the most civilized gentlemen who have been the subtlest slaughterers, to whom the Attilas and the Stenka Razins could not hold a candle? And if they are not so conspicuous as the Attilas and the Stenka Razins, it is simply because they are so often met with, are so ordinary, and have become so familiar to us. In any case, civilization has made mankind, if not more bloodthirsty, at least more vilely, more loathsomely bloodthirsty. In old days he saw justice in bloodshed, and with his conscience at peace exterminated those he thought proper. Now we do think bloodshed abominable, and yet we engage in this abomination, and with more energy than ever. Which is worse? Decide that for yourselves. They say that Cleopatra, excuse an instance from Roman history, was fond of sticking gold pins into her slave girls' breasts, and derived gratification from their screams and writhings. You will say that that was in the comparatively barbarous times. That these are barbarous times too, because also, comparatively speaking, pins are stuck in even now. That though man has now learned to see more clearly than in barbarous ages, he is still far from having learnt to act as reason and science would dictate. But yet you are fully convinced that he will be sure to learn when he gets rid of certain old bad habits, and when common sense and science have completely re-educated human nature and turned it in a normal direction. You are confident that then men will cease from intentional error and will, so to say, be compelled not to want to set his will against his normal interests. That is not all. Then you say, science itself will teach man, though to my mind it's a superfluous luxury, that he never really had any caprice or will of his own, and that he himself is something of the nature of a piano key or the stop of an organ, and that there are, besides, things called the laws of nature, so that everything he does is not done by his willing it, but is done of itself by the laws of nature. Consequently, we have only to discover these laws of nature, and man will no longer have to answer for his actions, and life will become exceedingly easy for him. All human actions will then, of course, be tabulated according to these laws mathematically, like tables of logarithms up to 108,000, and entered in an index. Or better still, there would be published certain edifying works of the nature of encyclopedic lexicons, in which everything will be so clearly calculated and explained that there will be no more incidents or adventures in the world. Then, this is all what you say, new economic relations will be established, all ready made and worked out with mathematical exactitude, so that every possible question will vanish in the twinkling of an eye, simply because every possible answer to it will be provided. Then the palace of crystal will be built. Then, in fact, those will be halcyon days. Of course, there is no guaranteeing, this is my comment, that it will not be, for instance, frightfully dull then. For what will one have to do when everything will be calculated and tabulated? But, on the other hand, everything will be extraordinarily rational. Of course, boredom may lead you to anything. It is boredom sets one sticking golden pins into people. But all that would not matter. What is bad, this is my comment again, is that I dare say people will be thankful for the gold pins then. Man is stupid, you know, phenomenally stupid. Or rather, he is not at all stupid, but he is so ungrateful that you could not find another like him in all creation. I, for instance, would not be in the least surprised if all of a sudden, apropos of nothing, in the midst of general prosperity, a gentleman with an ignoble, or rather with a reactionary and ironical countenance, were to arise and, putting his arms akimbo, say to us all, "I say, gentlemen, hadn't we better kick over the whole show and scatter rationalism to the winds, simply to send these logarithms to the devil, and to enable us to live once more at our own sweet foolish will?" That again would not matter. But what is annoying is that he would be sure to find followers. Such is the nature of man. And all that for the most foolish reason, which, one would think, was hardly worth mentioning. That is, that man everywhere and at all times, whoever he may be, has preferred to act as he chose, and not in the least as his reason and advantage dictated. And one may choose what is contrary to one's own interests, and sometimes one positively ought. That is my idea. One's own free unfettered choice, one's own caprice, however wild it may be, one's own fancy worked up at times to frenzy, is that very most advantageous advantage, which we have overlooked, which comes under no classification, and against which all systems and theories are continually being shattered to atoms. And how do these wiseacres know that man wants a normal, a virtuous choice? What has made them conceive that man must want a rationally advantageous choice? What man wants is simply independent choice, whatever that independence may cost, and wherever it may lead. And choice, of course, the devil only knows what choice. End of chapter 7. Chapter 8. Ha ha ha! But you know there is no such thing as choice, in reality. Say what you like. You will interpose with a chuckle. Science has succeeded in so far analyzing man that we know already that choice and what is called freedom of will is nothing else than... Stay, gentlemen. I meant to begin with that myself. I confess I was rather frightened. I was just going to say that the devil only knows what choice depends on, and that perhaps that was a very good thing, but I remembered the teaching of science, and pulled myself up. And here you have begun upon it. Indeed, if there really is some day discovered a formula for all our desires and caprices, that is, an explanation of what they depend upon, by what laws they arise, how they develop, what they are aiming at in one case and in another, and so on, that is a real mathematical formula. Then most likely man will at once cease to feel desire, indeed he will be certain to, for who would want to choose by rule? Besides, he will at once be transformed from a human being into an organ stop, or something of the sort. For what is a man without desires, without free will, and without choice, if not a stop in an organ? What do you think? Let us reckon the chances. Can such a thing happen or not? You decide. Our choice is usually mistaken from a false view of our advantage. We sometimes choose absolute nonsense, because in our foolishness we see in that nonsense the easiest means for attaining a supposed advantage. But when all that is explained and worked out on paper, which is perfectly possible, for it is contemptible and senseless to suppose that some laws of nature man will never understand, then certainly so-called desires will no longer exist. For if a desire should come into conflict with reason, we shall then reason and not desire, because it will be impossible, retaining our reason, to be senseless in our desires, and in that way knowingly act against reason and desire to injure ourselves. And as all choice and reasoning can be really calculated, because there will some day be discovered the laws of our so-called free will, so, joking apart, there may one day be something like a table constructed of them, so that we really shall choose in accordance with it. If, for instance, some day they calculate and prove to me that I made a long nose at someone because I could not help making a long nose at him, and that I had to do it in that particular way, what freedom is left me? Especially if I am a learned man and have taken my degree somewhere. Then I should be able to calculate my whole life for 30 years beforehand. In short, if this could be arranged, there would be nothing left for us to do. Anyway, we should have to understand that. And, in fact, we ought unwearyingly to repeat to ourselves that at such and such a time, and in such and such circumstances, nature does not ask our leave, that we have got to take her as she is, and not fashion her to suit our fancy, and if we really aspire to formulas and tables of rules, and well, even to the chemical retort, there's no help for it. We must accept the retort too, or else it will be accepted without our consent. Yes, but here I come to a stop. Gentlemen, you must excuse me for being over philosophical. It's the result of 40 years underground. Allow me to indulge my fancy. You see, gentlemen, reason is an excellent thing. There's no disputing that. But reason is nothing but reason, and satisfies only the rational side of man's nature, while will is a manifestation of the whole life, that is, of the whole human life, including reason and all the impulses. And although our life in this manifestation of it is often worthless, yet it is life, and not simply extracting square roots. Here I, for instance, quite naturally want to live in order to satisfy all my capacities for life, and not simply my capacity for reasoning. That is, not simply 1/20th of my capacity for life. What does reason know? Reason only knows what it has succeeded in learning. Some things, perhaps, it will never learn. This is a poor comfort. But why not say so frankly? And human nature acts as a whole, with everything that is in it, consciously or unconsciously, and even if it goes wrong, it lives. I suspect, gentlemen, that you are looking at me with compassion, You tell me again that an enlightened and developed man, such, in short, as the future man will be, cannot consciously desire anything disadvantageous to himself, that can be proved mathematically. I thoroughly agree. It can, by mathematics. But I repeat for the 100th time, there is one case, one only, when man may consciously, purposely desire what is injurious to himself, what is stupid, very stupid, simply in order to have the right to desire for himself even what is very stupid, and not to be bound by an obligation to desire only what is sensible. Of course, this very stupid thing, this caprice of ours, may be in reality, gentlemen, more advantageous for us than anything else on earth, especially in certain cases, and in particular it may be more advantageous than any advantage even when it does us obvious harm and contradicts the soundest conclusions of our reason concerning our advantage. For in any circumstances it preserves for us what is most precious and most important, that is, our personality, our individuality. Some, you see, maintain that this really is the most precious thing for mankind. Choice can, of course, if it chooses, be in agreement with reason, and especially if this is not abused, but kept within bounds. It is profitable and sometimes even praiseworthy. But very often, and even most often, choice is utterly and stubbornly opposed to reason. And do you know that that too is profitable, sometimes even praiseworthy? Gentlemen, let us suppose that man is not stupid. Indeed, one cannot refuse to suppose that, if only from one consideration, that if man is stupid, then who is wise? But if he is not stupid, he is monstrously ungrateful, phenomenally ungrateful. In fact, I believe that the best definition of man is the ungrateful biped. But that is not all, that is not his worst defect. His worst defect is his perpetual moral obliquity, perpetual from the days of the flood to the Schleswig Holstein period. Moral obliquity, and consequently lack of good sense, for it has long been accepted that lack of good sense is due to no other cause than moral obliquity. Put it to the test, and cast your eyes upon the history of mankind. What will you see? Is it a grand spectacle? Grand if you like. Take the Colossus of Rhodes, for instance. That's worth something. With good reason, Mr. Dostoevsky testifies of it that some say that it is the work of man's hands, while others maintain that it has been created by nature herself. Is it many-colored? Maybe it is many-colored too. If one takes the dress uniforms, military and civilian, of all peoples in all ages, that alone is worth something. And if you take the undress uniforms, you will never get to the end of it. No historian would be equal to the job. Is it monotonous? Maybe it's monotonous too. It's fighting and fighting. They are fighting now, they fought first, and they fought last. You will admit that it is almost too monotonous. In short, one may say anything about the history of the world, anything that might enter the most disordered imagination. The only thing one can't say is that it's rational. The very word sticks in one's throat. And indeed, this is the odd thing that is continually happening. There are continually turning up in life moral and rational persons, sages and lovers of humanity, who make it their object to live all their lives as morally and rationally as possible, to be, so to speak, a light to their neighbours, simply in order to show them that it is possible to live morally and rationally in this world. And yet we all know that those very people sooner or later have been false to themselves, playing some queer trick, often a most unseemly one. Now I ask you, what can be expected of man, since he is a being endowed with such strange qualities? Shower upon him every earthly blessing, drown him in a sea of happiness, so that nothing but bubbles of bliss can be seen on the surface, give him economic prosperity, such that he should have nothing else to do but sleep, eat cakes, and busy himself with the continuation of his species, and even then, out of sheer ingratitude, sheer spite, man would play you some nasty trick. He would even risk his cakes, and would deliberately desire the most fatal rubbish, the most uneconomical absurdity, simply to introduce into all this positive good sense his fatal fantastic element. It is just his fantastic dreams, his vulgar folly, that he will desire to retain simply in order to prove to himself, as though that were so necessary, that men still are men and not the keys of a piano, which the laws of nature threaten to control so completely that soon one will be able to desire nothing but by the calendar. And that is not all. Even if man really were nothing but a piano key, even if this were proved to him by natural science and mathematics, even then he would not become reasonable, but would purposely do something perverse out of simple ingratitude, simply to gain his point. And if he does not find means, he will contrive destruction and chaos, will contrive sufferings of all sorts, only to gain his point. He will launch a curse upon the world, and as only man can curse, it is his privilege, the primary distinction between him and other animals, may be by his curse alone he will attain his object, that is, convince himself that he is a man and not a piano key. If you say that all this, too, can be calculated and tabulated, chaos and darkness and curses, so that the mere possibility of calculating it all beforehand would stop it all, and reason would reassert itself, then man would purposely go mad in order to be rid of reason and gain his point. I believe in it, I answer for it, for the whole work of man really seems to consist in nothing but proving to himself every minute that he is a man and not a piano key. It may be at the cost of his skin, it may be by cannibalism, and this being so, can one help being tempted to rejoice that it is not yet come off, and that desire still depends on something we don't know? You will scream at me, that is, if you condescend to do so, that no one is touching my free will, that all they are concerned with is that my will should of itself, of its own free will, coincide with my own normal interests, with the laws of nature and arithmetic. Good heavens, gentlemen, what sort of free will is left when we come to tabulation and arithmetic, when it all will be a case of twice two makes four? Twice two makes four without my will, as if free will meant that. End of chapter 8.
Section 10 of White Nights and Other Stories by Fyodor Dostoevsky. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Notes from Underground by Fyodor Dostoevsky. Translated from the Russian by Constance Garnett. Part 2. Apropos of the wet snow. When from dark error's subjugation my words of passionate exhortation had wrenched thy fainting spirit free, and writhing prone in thine affliction thou didst recall with malediction the vice that had encompassed thee, and when thy slumbering conscience, fretting by recollection's torturing flame, thou didst reveal the hideous setting of thy life's current ere I came. When suddenly I saw thee sicken, and weeping hide thine anguished face, revolted, maddened, horror-stricken, at memories of foul disgrace. Nekrasov. Translated by Juliet Solskis. Chapter 1. At that time I was only 24. My life was even then gloomy, ill-regulated, and as solitary as that of a savage. I made friends with no one, and positively avoided talking, and buried myself more and more in my hole. At work in the office I never looked at any one, and I was perfectly well aware that my companions looked upon me, not only as a queer fellow, but even looked upon me, I always fancied this, with a sort of loathing. I sometimes wondered why it was that nobody except me fancied that he was looked upon with aversion. One of the clerks had a most repulsive pock-marked face, which looked positively villainous. I believe I should not have dared to look at any one with such an unsightly countenance. Another had such a very dirty old uniform that there was an unpleasant odor in his proximity. Yet not one of these gentlemen showed the slightest self-consciousness, either about their clothes or their countenance, or their character in any way. Neither of them ever imagined that they were looked at with repulsion. If they had imagined it, they would not have minded, so long as their superiors did not look at them in that way. It is clear to me now that, owing to my unbounded vanity and to the high standard I set for myself, I often looked at myself with furious discontent, which verged on loathing, and so I inwardly attributed the same feeling to every one. I hated my face, for instance. I thought it disgusting, and even suspected that there was something base in my expression. And so every day when I turned up at the office I tried to behave as independently as possible, and to assume a lofty expression, so that I might not be suspected of being abject. My face may be ugly, I thought, but let it be lofty, expressive, and above all extremely intelligent. But I was positively and painfully certain that it was impossible for my countenance ever to express those qualities. And what was worst of all, I thought it actually stupid-looking, and I would have been quite satisfied if I could have looked intelligent. In fact, I would even have put up with looking base, if at the same time my face could have been thought strikingly intelligent. Of course, I hated my fellow clerks one and all, and I despised them all. Yet at the same time I was, as it were, afraid of them. In fact, it happened at times that I thought more highly of them than of myself. It somehow happened quite suddenly that I alternated between despising them and thinking them superior to myself. A cultivated and decent man cannot be vain without setting a fearfully high standard for himself, and without despising and almost hating himself at certain moments. But whether I despised them or thought them superior, I dropped my eyes almost every time I met any one. I even made experiments whether I could face so-and-sos looking at me, and I was always the first to drop my eyes. This worried me to distraction. I had a sickly dread, too, of being ridiculous, and so had a slavish passion for the conventional in everything external. I loved to fall into the common rut, and had a whole-hearted terror of any kind of eccentricity in myself. But how could I live up to it? I was morbidly sensitive, as a man of our age should be. They were all stupid, and as like one another as so many sheep. Perhaps I was the only one in the office who fancied that I was a coward and a slave, and I fancied it just because I was more highly developed. But it was not only that I fancied it, it really was so. I was a coward and a slave. I say this without the slightest embarrassment. Every decent man of our age must be a coward and a slave. That is his normal condition. Of that I am firmly persuaded. He is made and constructed to that very end, and not only at the present time owing to some casual circumstances, but always, at all times, a decent man is bound to be a coward and a slave. It is the law of nature for all decent people all over the earth. If any one of them happens to be valiant about something, he need not be comforted nor carried away by that. He would show the white feather just the same before something else. That is how it invariably and inevitably ends. Only donkeys and mules are valiant, and they only till they are pushed up to the wall. It is not worth while to pay attention to them, for they really are of no consequence. Another circumstance, too, worried me in those days, that there was no one like me, and I was unlike any one else. I am alone, and they are every one, I thought, and pondered. From that it is evident that I was still a youngster. The very opposite sometimes happened. It was loathsome sometimes to go to the office. Things reached such a point that I often came home ill. But all at once, apropos of nothing, there would come a phase of skepticism and indifference. Everything happened in phases to me, and I would laugh myself at my intolerance and fastidiousness. I would reproach myself with being romantic. At one time I was unwilling to speak to any one, while at other times I would not only talk, but go to the length of contemplating making friends with them. All my fastidiousness would suddenly, for no rhyme or reason, vanish. Who knows, perhaps I never had really had it, and it had simply been affected, and got out of books. I have not decided that question even now. Once I quite made friends with them, visited their homes, played preference, drank vodka, talked of promotions. But here let me make a digression. We Russians, speaking generally, have never had those foolish transcendental romantics, German and still more French, on whom nothing produces any effect. If there were an earthquake, if all France perished at the barricades, they would still be the same. They would not even have the decency to effect a change, but would still go on singing their transcendental songs to the hour of their death, because they are fools. We in Russia have no fools. That is well known. That is what distinguishes us from foreign lands. Consequently, these transcendental natures are not found amongst us in their pure form. The idea that they are is due to our realistic journalists and critics of that day, always on the lookout for Kostanzhoglos and Uncle Pyotr Ivanovitches, and foolishly accepting them as our ideal. They have slandered our romantics, taking them for the same transcendental sort as in Germany or France. On the contrary, the characteristics of our romantics are absolutely and directly opposed to the transcendental European type, and no European standard can be applied to them. Allow me to make use of this word romantic, an old-fashioned and much respected word which has done good service and is familiar to all. The characteristics of our romantic are to understand everything, to see everything, and to see it often incomparably more clearly than our most realistic minds see it. To refuse to accept any one or anything, but at the same time not to despise anything. To give way, to yield from policy, never to lose sight of a useful practical object, such as rent-free quarters at the government expense, pensions, decorations, to keep their eye on that object through all the enthusiasms and volumes of lyrical poems, and at the same time to preserve the good and the beautiful, inviolate with them to the hour of their death, and to preserve themselves also, incidentally, like some precious jewel wrapped in cotton wool, if only for the benefit of the good and the beautiful. Our romantic is a man of great breadth and the greatest rogue of all our rogues. I assure you. I can assure you from experience, indeed. Of course, that is, if he is intelligent. But what am I saying? The romantic is always intelligent, and I only meant to observe that although we have had foolish romantics, they don't count, and they were only so because in the flower of their youth they degenerated into Germans, and to preserve their precious jewel more comfortably settled somewhere out there, by preference in Weimar or the Black Forest. I, for instance, genuinely despised my official work and did not openly abuse it simply because I was in it myself and got a salary for it. Anyway, take note, I did not openly abuse it. Our romantic would rather go out of his mind, a thing, however, which very rarely happens, than take to open abuse, unless he had some other career in view. And he is never kicked out. At most, they would take him to the lunatic asylum, as the King of Spain, if he should go very mad. But it is only the thin, fair people who go out of their minds in Russia. Innumerable romantics attain later in life to considerable rank in the service. Their many-sidedness is remarkable. And what a faculty they have for the most contradictory sensations! I was comforted by this thought even in those days, and I am of the same opinion now. That is why there are so many broad natures among us who never lose their ideal, even in the depths of degradation. And though they never stir a finger for their ideal, though they are arrant thieves and knaves, yet they tearfully cherish their first ideal and are extraordinarily honest at heart. Yes, it is only among us that the most incorrigible rogue can be absolutely and loftily honest at heart, without in the least ceasing to be a rogue. I repeat, our romantics frequently become such accomplished rascals, I use the term rascals affectionately, suddenly display such a sense of reality and practical knowledge, that their bewildered superiors and the public generally can only ejaculate in amazement. Their many-sidedness is really amazing, and goodness knows what it may develop into later on, and what the future has in store for us. It is not a poor material. I do not say this from any foolish or boastful patriotism,
but I feel sure that you are again imagining that I am joking, or perhaps it's just the contrary, and you are convinced that I really think so. Anyway, gentlemen, I shall welcome both views as an honor and a special favor. And do forgive my digression. I did not, of course, maintain friendly relations with my comrades, and soon was at loggerheads with them, and in my youth and inexperience I even gave up bowing to them, as though I had cut off all relations. That, however, only happened to me once. As a rule, I was always alone. In the first place, I spent most of my time at home, reading. I tried to stifle all that was continually seething within me, by means of external impressions. And the only external means I had was reading. Reading, of course, was a great help, exciting me, giving me pleasure and pain. But at times it bored me fearfully. One longed for movement in spite of everything, and I plunged all at once into dark, underground, loathsome vice of the pettiest kind. My wretched passions were acute, smarting from my continual sickly irritability. I had hysterical impulses, with tears and convulsions. I had no resource except reading, that is, there was nothing in my surroundings which I could respect and which attracted me. I was overwhelmed with depression, too. I had an hysterical craving for incongruity and for contrast, and so I took to vice. I have not said all this to justify myself. But no, I am lying. I did want to justify myself. I make that little observation for my own benefit, gentlemen. I don't want to lie. I vowed to myself I would not. And so, furtively, timidly, in solitude, at night, I indulged in filthy vice, with a feeling of shame which never deserted me, even at the most loathsome moments, and which at such moments nearly made me curse. Already, even then, I had my underground world in my soul. I was fearfully afraid of being seen, of being met, of being recognized. I visited various obscure haunts. One night, as I was passing a tavern, I saw through a lighted window some gentlemen fighting with billiard cues, and saw one of them thrown out of window. At other times I should have felt very much disgusted, but I was in such a mood at the time that I actually envied the gentleman thrown out of window, and I envied him so much that I even went into the tavern, and into the billiard-room. Perhaps, I thought, I'll have a fight too, and they'll throw me out of window. I was not drunk, but what is one to do? Depression will drive a man to such a pitch of hysteria. But nothing happened.
It seemed that I was not even equal to being thrown out of window, and I went away without having my fight. An officer put me in my place from the first moment. I was standing by the billiard table and in my ignorance blocking up the way, and he wanted to pass. He took me by the shoulders, and without a word, without a warning or explanation, moved me from where I was standing to another spot, and passed by as though he had not noticed me. I could have forgiven blows, but I could not forgive his having moved me without noticing me. Devil knows what I would have given for a real, regular quarrel, a more decent, a more literary one, so to speak. I had been treated like a fly. This officer was over 6 foot, while I was a spindly little fellow. But the quarrel was in my hands. I had only to protest, and I certainly would have been thrown out of the window, but I changed my mind, and preferred to beat a resentful retreat. I went out of the tavern straight home, confused and troubled, and the next night I went out again with the same lewd intentions, still more furtively, abjectly, and miserably than before, as it were with tears in my eyes, but still I did go out again. Don't imagine, though, it was cowardice made me slink away from the officer. I never have been a coward at heart, though I have always been a coward in action. Don't be in a hurry to laugh. I assure you I can explain it all. Oh, if only that officer had been one of the sort who would consent to fight a duel! But no, he was one of those gentlemen, alas, long extinct, who preferred fighting with cues, or, like Gogol's Lieutenant Pirogov, appealing to the police. They did not fight duels, and would have thought a duel with a civilian like me an utterly unseemly procedure in any case. And they looked upon the duel altogether as something impossible, something free-thinking and French. But they were quite ready to bully. especially when they were over 6 foot. I did not slink away through cowardice, but through an unbounded vanity. I was afraid not of his 6 foot, not of getting a sound thrashing and being thrown out of the window. I should have had physical courage enough, I assure you, but I had not the moral courage. What I was afraid of was that every one present, from the insolent marker down to the lowest little stinking pimply clerk in a greasy collar, would jeer at me and fail to understand when I began to protest and to address them in literary language. For the point of honor, not of honor, but of the point of honor, point d'honneur, one cannot speak among us except in literary language. You can't allude to the point of honor in ordinary language. I was fully convinced, the sense of reality in spite of all my romanticism, that they would all simply split their sides with laughter, and that the officer would not simply beat me, that is, without insulting me, but would certainly prod me in the back with his knee, kick me round the billiard table, and only then perhaps have pity and drop me out of the window. Of course this trivial incident could not, with me, end in that. I often met that officer afterwards in the street and noticed him very carefully. I am not quite sure whether he recognized me. I imagine not. I judge from certain signs. But I stared at him with spite and hatred, and so it went on, for several years. My resentment grew even deeper with years. At first I began making stealthy inquiries about this officer. It was difficult for me to do so, for I knew no one. But one day I heard some one shout his surname in the street as I was following him at a distance, as though I were tied to him, and so I learnt his surname. Another time I followed him to his flat, and for 10 kopecks learned from the porter where he lived, on which story, whether he lived alone or with others, and so on, in fact, everything one could learn from a porter. One morning, though I had never tried my hand with the pen, it suddenly occurred to me to write a satire on this officer in the form of a novel which would unmask his villainy. I wrote the novel with relish. I did unmask his villainy, I even exaggerated it. At first I so altered his surname that it could easily be recognized, but on second thoughts I changed it, and sent the story to the Otechesvenia Zapiski. But at that time such attacks were not the fashion, and my story was not printed. That was a great vexation to me. Sometimes I was positively choked with resentment. At last I determined to challenge my enemy to a duel. I composed a splendid, charming letter to him imploring him to apologize to me, and hinting rather plainly at a duel in case of refusal. The letter was so composed that if the officer had had the least understanding of the good and the beautiful, he would certainly have flung himself on my neck and offered me his friendship. And how fine that would have been! How we should have got on together! He could have shielded me with his higher rank, while I could have improved his mind with my culture, and, well, my ideas, and all sorts of things might have happened. Only fancy, this was 2 years after his insult to me, and my challenge would have been a ridiculous anachronism, in spite of all the ingenuity of my letter in disguising and explaining away the anachronism. But, thank God, to this day I thank the Almighty with tears in my eyes, I did not send the letter to him. Cold shivers run down my back when I think of what might have happened if I had sent it. And all at once I revenged myself in the simplest way, by a stroke of genius. A brilliant thought suddenly dawned upon me. Sometimes on holidays I used to stroll along the sunny side of the Nevsky about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, though it was hardly a stroll so much as a series of innumerable miseries, humiliations, and resentments. But no doubt that was just what I wanted. I used to wriggle along in a most unseemly fashion, like an eel, continually moving aside to make way for generals, for officers of the guards and the hussars, or for ladies. At such minutes there used to be a convulsive twinge at my heart, and I used to feel hot all down my back at the mere thought of the wretchedness of my attire, of the wretchedness and abjectness of my little scurrying figure. This was a regular martyrdom, a continual, intolerable humiliation at the thought, which passed into an incessant and direct sensation that I was a mere fly in the eyes of all this world, a nasty, disgusting fly, more intelligent, more highly developed, more refined in feeling than any of them,
of course, but a fly that was continually making way for everyone, insulted and injured by everyone. Why I inflicted this torture upon myself, why I went to the Nevsky, I don't know. I felt simply drawn there at every possible opportunity. Already, then, I began to experience a rush of the enjoyment of which I spoke in the first chapter. After my affair with the officer, I felt even more drawn there than before. It was on the Nevsky that I met him most frequently. There I could admire him. He, too, went there chiefly on holidays. He, too, turned out of his path for generals and persons of high rank. And he, too, wriggled between them like an eel. But people like me, or even better dressed like me, he simply walked over. He made straight for them as though there was nothing but empty space before him, and never, under any circumstances, turned aside. I gloated over my resentment watching him, and always resentfully made way for him. It exasperated me that even in the street I could not be on an even footing with him. Why must you invariably be the first to move aside? I kept asking myself in hysterical rage, waking up sometimes at 3 o'clock in the morning. Why is it you and not he? There's no regulation about it. There's no written law. Let the making way be equal as it usually is when refined people meet. He moves halfway, and you move halfway. You pass with mutual respect. But that never happened, and I always moved aside while he did not even notice my making way for him. And lo and behold, a bright idea dawned upon me. What, I thought, if I meet him and don't move on one side? What if I don't move aside on purpose, even if I knock up against him? How would that be? This audacious idea took such a hold on me that it gave me no peace. I was dreaming of it continually, horribly, and I purposely went more frequently to the Nevsky in order to picture more vividly how I should do it when I did do it. I was delighted. This intention seemed to me more and more practical and possible. Of course I shall not really push him, I thought, already more good-natured in my joy. I will simply not turn aside, will run up against him, not very violently, but just shouldering each other, just as much as decency permits. I will push against him just as much as he pushes against me. At last I made up my mind completely. But my preparations took a great deal of time. To begin with, when I carried out my plan I should need to be looking rather more decent, and so I had to think of my get-up. In case of emergency, if, for instance, there were any sort of public scandal, and the public there is the most recherché, the Countess walks there, Prince D. walks there, all the literary world is there, I must be well dressed. That inspires respect and of itself puts us on an equal footing in the eyes of society. With this object I asked for some of my salary in advance, and bought at Tchurkin's a pair of black gloves and a decent hat. Black gloves seemed to me both more dignified and bon ton than the lemon-colored ones which I had contemplated at first. The color is too gaudy, it looks as though one were trying to be conspicuous, and I did not take the lemon-colored ones. I had got ready long beforehand a good shirt with white bone studs. My overcoat was the only thing that held me back. The coat in itself was a very good one. It kept me warm. But it was wadded, and it had a raccoon collar, which was the height of vulgarity. I had to change the collar at any sacrifice, and to have a beaver one like an officer's. For this purpose I began visiting the Gostiny Dvor, and after several attempts I pitched upon a piece of cheap German beaver. Though these German beavers soon grow shabby and look wretched, yet at first they look exceedingly well, and I only needed it for one occasion. I asked the price. Even so, it was too expensive. After thinking it over thoroughly, I decided to sell my raccoon collar. The rest of the money, a considerable sum for me, I decided to borrow from Anton Antonitch Sitotachkin, my immediate superior, an unassuming person, though grave and judicious. He never lent money to any one, but I had, on entering the service, been specially recommended to him by an important personage who had got me my berth. I was horribly worried. To borrow from Anton Antonitch seemed to me monstrous and shameful. I did not sleep for 2 or 3 nights. Indeed, I did not sleep well at that time. I was in a fever. I had a vague sinking at my heart, or else a sudden throbbing. Anton Antonitch was surprised at first, then he frowned, Then he reflected, and did after all lend me the money, receiving from me a written authorization to take from my salary a fortnight later the sum that he had lent me. In this way everything was at last ready. The handsome beaver replaced the mean-looking raccoon, and I began by degrees to get to work. It would never have done to act off-hand, at random. The plan had to be carried out skilfully, by degrees. But I must confess that after many efforts I began to despair. We simply could not run into each other. I made every preparation. I was quite determined. It seemed as though we should run into one another directly, and before I knew what I was doing I had stepped aside for him again, and he had passed without noticing me. I even prayed as I approached him that God would grant me determination. One time I had made up my mind thoroughly, but it ended in my stumbling and falling at his feet because, at the very last instant, when I was 6 inches from him, my courage failed me. He very calmly stepped over me, while I flew on one side like a ball. That night I was ill again, feverish and delirious. And suddenly it ended most happily. The night before I had made up my mind not to carry out my fatal plan and to abandon it all, and with that object I went to the Nevsky for the last time, just to see how I would abandon it all. Suddenly, 3 paces from my enemy, I unexpectedly made up my mind. I closed my eyes, and we ran full tilt, shoulder to shoulder, against one another. I did not budge an inch and passed him on a perfectly equal footing. He did not even look round and pretended not to notice it. But he was only pretending, I am convinced of that. I am convinced of that to this day. Of course, I got the worst of it. He was stronger, but that was not the point. The point was that I had attained my object. I had kept up my dignity. I had not yielded a step, and had put myself publicly on an equal social footing with him. I returned home feeling that I was fully avenged for everything. I was delighted. I was triumphant, and sang Italian arias. Of course, I will not describe to you what happened to me 3 days later. If you have read my first chapter, you can guess that for yourself. The officer was afterwards transferred. I have not seen him now for 14 years. What is the dear fellow doing now? Whom is he walking over? End of Chapter 1. Recording by Bill Borst. Section 11 of White Nights and Other Stories by Fyodor Dostoevsky. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Notes from Underground by Fyodor Dostoevsky. Translated from the Russian by Constance Garnett. Part 2. Apropos of the wet snow. Chapter 2. But the period of my dissipation would end, and I always felt very sick afterwards. It was followed by remorse. I tried to drive it away. I felt too sick. By degrees, however, I grew used to that too. I grew used to everything, or rather I voluntarily resigned myself to enduring it. But I had a means of escape that reconciled everything, that was to find refuge in the good and the beautiful. In dreams, of course. I was a terrible dreamer. I would dream for 3 months on end, tucked away in my corner, and you may believe me that at those moments I had no resemblance to the gentleman who, in the perturbation of his chicken heart, put a collar of German beaver on his greatcoat. I suddenly became a hero. I would not have admitted my 6-foot lieutenant even if he had called on me. I could not even picture him before me then. What were my dreams, and how I could satisfy myself with them, it is hard to say now, but at the time I was satisfied with them. Though, indeed, even now I am to some extent satisfied with them. Dreams were particularly sweet and vivid after a spell of dissipation. They came with remorse and with tears, with curses and transports. There were moments of such positive intoxication, of such happiness, that there was not the faintest trace of irony within me, on my honor. I had faith, hope, love. I believed blindly at such times that by some miracle, by some external circumstance, all this would suddenly open out, expand, that suddenly a vista of suitable activity, beneficent, good, and above all ready-made,
What sort of activity I had no idea, but the great thing was that it should be all ready for me, would rise up before me, and I should come out into the light of day, almost riding a white horse and crowned with laurel. Anything but the foremost place I could not conceive for myself, and for that very reason I quite contentedly occupied the lowest in reality. Either to be a hero or to grovel in the mud. There was nothing between. That was my ruin, for when I was in the mud I comforted myself with the thought that at other times I was a hero. And the hero was a cloak for the mud. For an ordinary man it was shameful to defile himself, but a hero was too lofty to be utterly defiled, and so he might defile himself. It is worth noting that these attacks of the good and the beautiful visited me even during the period of dissipation, and just at the times when I was touching the bottom. They came in separate spurts, as though reminding me of themselves, but did not banish the dissipation by their appearance. On the contrary, they seemed to add a zest to it by contrast, and were only sufficiently present to serve as an appetizing sauce. That sauce was made up of contradictions and sufferings, of agonizing inward analysis, and all these pangs and pin-pricks gave a certain piquancy, even a significance to my dissipation, in fact, completely answered the purpose of an appetizing sauce. There was a certain depth of meaning in it, and I could hardly have resigned myself to the simple, vulgar, direct debauchery of a clerk and have endured all the filthiness of it. What could have allured me about it then and have drawn me at night into the street? No, I had a lofty way of getting out of it all. And what loving kindness, O Lord, what loving kindness I felt at times in those dreams of mine, in those flights into the good and the beautiful. Though it was fantastic love, though it was never applied to anything human in reality, yet there was so much of this love that one did not feel afterwards even the impulse to apply it in reality. That would have been superfluous. Everything, however, passed satisfactorily by a lazy and fascinating transition into the sphere of art, that is, into the beautiful forms of life, lying ready, largely stolen from the poets and novelists, and adapted to all sorts of needs and uses. I, for instance, was triumphant over every one. Every one, of course, was in dust and ashes, and was forced spontaneously to recognize my superiority. And I forgave them all. I was a poet and a grand gentleman. I fell in love. I came in for countless millions and immediately devoted them to humanity, and at the same time I confessed before all the people my shameful deeds, which of course were not merely shameful, but had in them much that was good and beautiful, something in the Manfred style. Every one would kiss me and weep. What idiots they would be if they did not! While I should go barefoot and hungry, preaching new ideas and fighting a victorious Austerlitz against the obscurantists. Then the band would play a march, an amnesty would be declared, the Pope would agree to retire from Rome to Brazil, then there would be a ball for the whole of Italy, at the Villa Borghese, on the shores of the Lake of Como, the Lake of Como being for that purpose transferred to the neighborhood of Rome. Then would come a scene in the bushes, and so on, as though you did not know all about it. You will say that it is vulgar and contemptible to drag all this into public after all the tears and transports which I have myself confessed. But why is it contemptible? Can you imagine that I am ashamed of it all, and that it was stupider than anything in your life, gentlemen? And I can assure you that some of these fancies were by no means badly composed. It did not all happen on the shores of Lake Como. And yet you are right, it really is vulgar and contemptible. And most contemptible of all it is that now I am attempting to justify myself to you. And even more contemptible than that is my making this remark now. But that's enough, or there will be no end to it. Each step will be more contemptible than the last. I could never stand more than 3 months of dreaming at a time without feeling an irresistible desire to plunge into society. To plunge into society meant to visit my superior at the office, Anton Antonitch Syetotchkin. He was the only permanent acquaintance I have had in my life, and wonder at the fact myself now. But I only went to see him when that phase came over me, and when my dreams had reached such a point of bliss that it became essential at once to embrace my fellows and all mankind. and for that purpose I needed at least one human being actually existing. I had to call on Anton Antonitch, however, on Tuesday, his at-home day, so I had always to time my passionate desire to embrace humanity so that it might fall on a Tuesday. This Anton Antonitch lived on the 4th story in a house in 5 corners, in 4 low-pitched rooms, one smaller than the other, of a particularly frugal and sallow appearance. He had 2 daughters and their aunt, who used to pour out the tea. Of the daughters, one was 13 and another 14. They both had snub noses, and I was awfully shy of them, because they were always whispering and giggling together. The master of the house usually sat in his study on a leather couch in front of the table with some grey-headed gentleman, usually a colleague from our office or some other department. I never saw more than 2 or 3 visitors there, always the same. They talked about the excise duty, about business in the Senate, about salaries, about promotions, about His Excellency and the best means of pleasing him, and so on. I had the patience to sit like a fool beside these people for 4 hours at a stretch, listening to them without knowing what to say to them or venturing to say a word. I became stupefied. Several times I felt myself perspiring. I was overcome by a sort of paralysis. But this was pleasant and good for me. On returning home I deferred for a time my desire to embrace all mankind. I had, however, one other acquaintance, of a sort, Simonov, who was an old schoolfellow. I had a number of schoolfellows indeed in Petersburg, but I did not associate with them, and had even given up nodding to them in the street. I believe I had transferred into the department I was in simply to avoid their company, and to cut off all connection with my hateful childhood. Curses on that school and all those terrible years of penal servitude! In short, I parted from my schoolfellows as soon as I got out into the world. There were 2 or 3 left, to whom I nodded in the street. One of them was Simonov, who had been in no way distinguished at school, was of a quiet and equitable disposition, but I discovered in him a certain independence of character and even honesty. I don't even suppose that he was particularly stupid. I had at one time spent some rather soulful moments with him, but these had not lasted long and had somehow been suddenly clouded over. He was evidently uncomfortable at these reminiscences, and was, I fancy, always afraid that I might take up the same tone again. I suspected that he had an aversion for me, but still I went on going to see him, not being quite certain of it. And so on one occasion, unable to endure my solitude, and knowing that as it was Thursday Anton Antonitch's door would be closed, I thought of Simonov. Climbing up to his 4th story, I was thinking that the man disliked me and that it was a mistake to go and see him. But as it always happened that such reflections impelled me, as though purposely, to put myself into a false position, I went in. It was almost a year since I had last seen Simonov. Chapter 3. I found 2 of my old schoolfellows with him. They seemed to be discussing an important matter. All of them took scarcely any notice of my entrance, which was strange, for I had not met them for years. Evidently they looked upon me as something on the level of a common fly. I had not been treated like that even at school, though they all hated me. I knew, of course, that they must despise me now for my lack of success in the service, and for my having let myself sink so low, going about badly dressed and so on, which seemed to them a sign of my incapacity and insignificance. But I had not expected such contempt. Simonov was positively surprised at my turning up. Even in old days he had always seemed surprised at my coming. All this disconcerted me. I sat down, feeling rather miserable, and began listening to what they were saying. They were engaged in warm and earnest conversation about a farewell dinner which they wanted to arrange for the next day to a comrade of theirs called Zverkov, an officer in the army, who was going away to a distant province. This Zverkov had been all the time at school with me too. I had begun to hate him particularly in the upper forms. In the lower forms he had simply been a pretty, playful boy whom everyone liked. I had hated him, however, even in the lower forms, just because he was a pretty and playful boy.
He was always bad at his lessons and got worse and worse as he went on. However, he left with a good certificate, as he had powerful interest. During his last year at school he came in for an estate of 200 serfs, and as almost all of us were poor, he took up a swaggering tone among us. He was vulgar in the extreme, but at the same time he was a good-natured fellow, even in his swaggering. In spite of superficial, fantastic, and sham notions of honour and dignity, all but very few of us positively grovelled before Zverkov, and the more so the more he swaggered. And it was not from any interested motive that they grovelled, but simply because he had been favoured by the gifts of nature. Moreover, it was, as it were, an accepted idea among us that Zverkov was a specialist in regard to tact and the social graces. This last fact particularly infuriated me. I hated the abrupt, self-confident tone of his voice, his admiration of his own witticisms, which were often frightfully stupid, though he was bold in his language. I hated his handsome but stupid face, for which I would, however, have gladly exchanged my intelligent one, and the free and easy military manners in fashion in the '40s. I hated the way in which he used to talk of his future conquests of women. He did not venture to begin his attack upon women until he had the epaulets of an officer and was looking forward to them with impatience, and boasted of the duels he would constantly be fighting. I remember how I, invariably so taciturn, suddenly fastened upon Zverkov when one day talking at a leisure moment with his schoolfellows of his future relations with the fair sex, and growing as sportive as a puppy in the sun, he all at once declared that he would not leave a single village girl on his estate unnoticed, that was his droit de seigneur, and that if the peasants dared to protest he would have them all flogged and double the tax on them, the bearded rascals. Our servile rabble applauded, but I attacked him, not from compassion for the girls and their fathers, but simply because they were applauding such an insect. I got the better of him on that occasion, but though Zverkov was stupid, he was lively and impudent, and so laughed it off, and in such a way that my victory was not really complete. The laugh was on his side. He got the better of me on several occasions afterwards, but without malice, jestingly, casually. I remained angrily and contemptuously silent and would not answer him. When we left school he made advances to me. I did not rebuff them, for I was flattered, but we soon parted, and quite naturally. Afterwards I heard of his barrack-room success as a lieutenant, and of the fast life he was leading. Then there came other rumours of his successes in the service. By then he had taken to cutting me in the street, and I suspected that he was afraid of compromising himself by greeting a personage as insignificant as me. I saw him once in the theatre, in the third tier of boxes. By then he was wearing shoulder-straps. He was twisting and twirling about, ingratiating himself with the daughters of an ancient general. In 3 years he had gone off considerably, though he was still rather handsome and adroit. One could see that by the time he was 30 he would be corpulent. So it was to this Zverkov that my schoolfellows were going to give a dinner on his departure. They had kept up with him for those 3 years, though privately they did not consider themselves on an equal footing with him. I am convinced of that. Of Simonov's 2 visitors one was Ferfitchkin, a Russianized German, a little fellow with the face of a monkey, a blockhead, who was always deriding everyone, a very bitter enemy of mine from our days in the lower forms. A vulgar, impudent, swaggering fellow, who affected a most sensitive feeling of personal honour, though of course he was a wretched little coward at heart. He was one of those worshippers of Zverkov who made up to the latter from interested motives, and often borrowed money from him. Simonov's other visitor, Trudolyubov, was a person in no way remarkable. A tall young fellow, in the army, with a cold face, fairly honest, though he worshipped success of every sort, and was only capable of thinking of promotion. He was some sort of distant relation of Zverkov's, and this, foolish as it seems, gave him a certain importance among us. He always thought me of no consequence whatever. His behaviour to me, though not quite courteous, was tolerable. "Well, with 7 roubles each," said Trudolyubov, 21 roubles between the 3 of us, we ought to be able to get a good dinner. Zverkov, of course, won't pay. Of course not, since we are inviting him, Simonov decided. "Can you imagine," Ferfitchkin interrupted hotly and conceitedly, like some insolent flunkey boasting of his master, the General's decorations, "can you imagine that Zverkov will let us pay alone? He will accept from delicacy, but he will order half a dozen bottles of champagne." "Do we want half a dozen for the four of us?" observed Trudolyubov, taking notice only of the half-dozen. "So the three of us, with Zverkov for the fourth, 21 roubles, at the Hotel de Paris at 5 o'clock tomorrow," Simonov, who had been asked to make the arrangements, concluded finally. "How 21 roubles?" I asked in some agitation, with a show of being offended. "If you count me, it will not be 21, but 28 roubles." It seemed to me that to invite myself so suddenly and unexpectedly would be positively graceful, and that they would all be conquered at once and would look at me with respect. "Do you want to join too?" Simonov observed, with no appearance of pleasure, seeming to avoid looking at me. He knew me through and through. It infuriated me that he knew me so thoroughly. "Why not? I am an old schoolfellow of his too, I believe, and I must own I feel hurt that you have left me out," I said, boiling over again. "And where were we to find you?" Ferfitchkin put in roughly. "You never were on good terms with Zverkov," Trudolyubov added, frowning. But I had already clutched at the idea and would not give it up. "It seems to me that no one has a right to form an opinion upon that," I retorted in a shaking voice, as though something tremendous had happened. "Perhaps that is just my reason for wishing it now, that I have not always been on good terms with him." "Oh, there's no making you out, with these refinements," Trudolyubov jeered. "We'll put your name down," Simonov decided, addressing me. "Tomorrow at 5 o'clock at the Hotel de Paris." "What about the money?" Ferfitchkin began in an undertone, indicating me to Simonov, but he broke off, for even Simonov was embarrassed. "That will do," said Trudolyubov, getting up. "If he wants to come so much, let him." "But it's a private thing, between us friends," Ferfitchkin said crossly, as he too picked up his hat. "It's not an official gathering." "We do not want at all, perhaps—" They went away. Ferfitchkin did not greet me in any way as he went out. Trudolyubov barely nodded. Simonov, with whom I was left tete-a-tete, was in a state of vexation and perplexity, and looked at me queerly. He did not sit down and did not ask me to. Yes. Tomorrow, then. Will you pay your subscription now? I just ask so as to know," he muttered in embarrassment. I flushed crimson, and as I did so I remembered that I had owed Simonov 15 roubles for ages, which I had, indeed, never forgotten, though I had not paid it. "You will understand, Simonov, that I could have no idea when I came here. I am very much vexed that I have forgotten—" All right, that doesn't matter. You can pay tomorrow after the dinner. I simply wanted to know— Please don't—" He broke off and began pacing the room, still more vexed. As he walked he began to stamp with his heels. "Am I keeping you?" I asked, after 2 minutes of silence. "Oh," he said, starting. "That is, to be truthful, yes. I have to go and see someone. Not far from here," he added in an apologetic voice, somewhat abashed. "My goodness, why didn't you say so?" I cried, seizing my cap with an astonishingly free and easy air, which was the last thing I should have expected of myself. "It's close by, not 2 paces away," Simonov repeated, accompanying me to the front door with a fussy air which did not suit him at all. "So 5 o'clock punctually tomorrow," he called down the stairs after me. He was very glad to get rid of me. I was in a fury. What possessed me? What possessed me to force myself upon them, I wondered, grinding my teeth, as I strode along the street, for a scoundrel, a pig like that Zverkov? Of course, I had better not go. Of course, I must just snap my fingers at them. I am not bound in any way. I'll send Simonov a note by tomorrow's post. But what made me furious was that I knew for certain that I should go, that I should make a point of going, and the more tactless, the more unseemly my going would be, the more certainly I would go. And there was a positive obstacle to my going. I had no money. All I had was 9 roubles. I had to give 7 of that to my servant, Apollon, for his monthly wages. That was all I paid him. He had to keep himself. Not to pay him was impossible, considering his character, But I will talk about that fellow, about that plague of mine, another time. However, I knew I should go and should not pay him his wages. That night I had the most hideous dreams. No wonder. All the evening I had been oppressed by memories of my miserable days at school, and I could not shake them off. I was sent to the school by distant relations, upon whom I was dependent and of whom I have heard nothing since. They sent me there a forlorn, silent boy, already crushed by their reproaches, already troubled by doubt, and looking with savage distrust at every one. My schoolfellows met me with spiteful and merciless gibes because I was not like any of them. But I could not endure their taunts. I could not give in to them with the ignoble readiness with which they gave in to one another. I hated them from the first, and shut myself away from every one in timid, wounded, and disproportionate pride. Their coarseness revolted me. They laughed cynically at my face, at my clumsy figure. And yet what stupid faces they had themselves! In our school the boys' faces seemed in a special way to degenerate and grow stupider. How many fine-looking boys came to us! In a few years they became repulsive. Even at 16 I wondered at them morosely. Even then I was struck by the pettiness of their thoughts, the stupidity of their pursuits, their games, their conversations. They had no understanding of such essential things, they took no interest in such striking, impressive subjects, that I could not help considering them inferior to myself. It was not wounded vanity that drove me to it. And for God's sake do not thrust upon me your hackneyed remarks, repeated to nausea, that I was only a dreamer, while they even then had an understanding of life. They understood nothing, they had no idea of real life, and I swear that that was what made me most indignant with them. On the contrary, the most obvious striking reality they accepted with fantastic stupidity, and even at that time were accustomed to respect success. Everything that was just, but oppressed and looked down upon, they laughed at heartlessly and shamefully. They took rank for intelligence. Even at 16 they were already talking about a snug berth. Of course, a great deal of it was due to their stupidity, to the bad examples with which they had always been surrounded in their childhood and boyhood. They were monstrously depraved. Of course, a great deal of that, too, was superficial and an assumption of cynicism. Of course, there were glimpses of youth and freshness even in their depravity. But even that freshness was not attractive, and showed itself in a certain rakishness. I hated them horribly, though perhaps I was worse than any of them. They repaid me in the same way, and did not conceal their aversion for me. But by then I did not desire their affection. On the contrary, I continually longed for their humiliation. To escape from their derision I purposely began to make all the progress I could with my studies, and forced my way to the very top. This impressed them. Moreover, they all began by degrees to grasp that I had already read books none of them could read, and understood things, not forming part of our school curriculum, of which they had not even heard. They took a savage and sarcastic view of it, but were morally impressed, especially as the teachers began to notice me on those grounds. The mockery ceased, but the hostility remained, and cold and strained relations became permanent between us. In the end I could not put up with it. With years, a craving for society, for friends, developed in me. I attempted to get on friendly terms with some of my schoolfellows, but somehow or other my intimacy with them was always strained and soon ended of itself. Once, indeed, I did have a friend, but I was already a tyrant at heart. I wanted to exercise unbounded sway over him. I tried to instill into him a contempt for his surroundings. I required of him a disdainful and complete break with those surroundings. I frightened him with my passionate affection. I reduced him to tears, to hysterics. He was a simple and devoted soul, but when he devoted himself to me entirely I began to hate him immediately and repulsed him, as though all I needed him for was to win a victory over him, to subjugate him and nothing else. But I could not subjugate all of them. My friend was not at all like them either. He was, in fact, a rare exception. The first thing I did on leaving school was to give up the special job for which I had been destined, so as to break all ties, to curse my past, and shake the dust from off my feet. And goodness knows why, after all that, I should go trudging off to Simonov's. Early next morning I roused myself and jumped out of bed with excitement, as though it were all about to happen at once. But I believed that some radical change in my life was coming, and would inevitably come that day. Owing to its rarity, perhaps, any external event, however trivial, always made me feel as though some radical change in my life were at hand. I went to the office, however, as usual, but sneaked away home 2 hours earlier to get ready. The great thing, I thought, is not to be the first to arrive, or they will think I am overjoyed at coming. But there were thousands of such great points to consider, and they all agitated and overwhelmed me. I polished my boots a second time with my own hands. Nothing in the world would have induced Apollon to clean them twice a day, as he considered that it was more than his duties required of him. I stole the brushes to clean them from the passage, being careful he should not detect it, for fear of his contempt. Then I minutely examined my clothes, and thought that everything looked old, worn, and threadbare. I had let myself get too slovenly. My uniform, perhaps, was tidy, but I could not go out to dinner in my uniform. The worst of it was that on the knee of my trousers was a big yellow stain. I had a foreboding that that stain would deprive me of 9/10 of my personal dignity. I knew, too, that it was very poor to think so. But this is no time for thinking. Now I am in for the real thing, I thought, and my heart sank. I knew, too, perfectly well, even then, that I was monstrously exaggerating the facts. But how could I help it? I could not control myself, and was already shaking with fever. With despair I pictured to myself how coldly and disdainfully that scoundrel Zverkov would meet me, with what dull-witted, invincible contempt the blockhead Trudolyubov would look at me, with what impudent rudeness the insect Ferfitchkin would snigger at me in order to curry favour with Zverkov, how completely Simonov would take it all in, and how he would despise me for the abjectness of my vanity and lack of spirit. And worst of all, how paltry, unliterary, commonplace it would all be. Of course, the best thing would be not to go at all. But that was most impossible of all. If I feel impelled to do anything, I seem to be pitchforked into it. I should have jeered at myself ever afterwards. So you funked it, you funked it, you funked the real thing. On the contrary, I passionately longed to show all that rabble that I was by no means such a spiritless creature as I seemed to myself. What is more, even in the acutest paroxysm of this cowardly fever, I dreamed of getting the upper hand, of dominating them, carrying them away, making them like me, if only for my elevation of thought and unmistakable wit. They would abandon Zverkov. He would sit on one side, silent and ashamed, while I should crush him. Then, perhaps, we would be reconciled, and drink to our everlasting friendship. But what was most bitter and most humiliating for me was that I knew even then, knew fully and for certain, that I needed nothing of all this really, that I did not really want to crush, to subdue, to attract them, and that I did not care a straw really for the result, even if I did achieve it. Oh, how I prayed for the day to pass quickly! In unutterable anguish I went to the window, opened the movable pane, and looked out into the troubled darkness of the thickly falling wet snow. At last my wretched little clock hissed out 5. I seized my hat, and trying not to look at Apollon, who had been all day expecting his month's wages, but in his foolishness was unwilling to be the first to speak about it, I slipped between him and the door, and jumping into a high-class sledge, on which I spent my last half-rouble, I drove up in grand style to the Hôtel de Paris. End of Chapter 3. Recording by Bill Borst.
Section 14 of White Nights and Other Stories by Fyodor Dostoevsky. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Andrew David King. Notes from Underground by Fyodor Dostoevsky. Translated from the Russian by Constance Garnett. Part 2. Apropos of the wet snow. Chapter 7. Oh, hush, Liza. How can you talk about being like a book when it makes even me, an outsider, feel sick? Though I don't look at it as an outsider, for, indeed, it touches me to the heart. Is it possible that you do not feel sick at being here yourself? Evidently habit does wonders. God knows what habit can do with anyone. Can you seriously think that you will never grow old, that you will always be good-looking, and that they will keep you here forever and ever? I say nothing of the loathsomeness of the life here, though let me tell you this about it, about your present life, I mean. Here, though you are young now, attractive, nice, with soul and feeling, yet you know, as soon as I came to myself just now, I felt at once sick at being here with you. One can only come here when one is drunk. But if you were anywhere else, living as good people live, I should perhaps be more than attracted by you, should fall in love with you, should be glad of a look from you, let alone a word. I should hang about your door, should go down on my knees to you, should look upon you as my betrothed and think it an honor to be allowed to. I should not dare to have an impure thought about you. But here, you see, I know that I have only to whistle, and you have to come with me whether you like it or not. I don't consult your wishes, but you mine. The lowest laborer hires himself as a workman, but he doesn't make a slave of himself altogether. Besides, he knows that he will be free again presently. But when are you free? Only think what you are giving up here. What is it you are making a slave of? It is your soul, together with your body. You are selling your soul which you have no right to dispose of. You give your love to be outraged by every drunkard. Love, but that's everything, you know. It's a priceless diamond. It's a maiden's treasure, love. Why, a man would be ready to give his soul, to face death to gain that love. But how much is your love worth now? You are sold, all of you, body and soul, and there is no need to strive for love, and you can have everything without love. And you know there is no greater insult to a girl than that. Do you understand? To be sure, I have heard that they comfort you, poor fools. They let you have lovers of your own here. But you know that's simply a farce, that's simply a sham. It's just laughing at you, and you are taken in by it. Why, do you suppose he really loves you, that lover of yours? I don't believe it. How can he love you when he knows you may be called away from him any minute? He would be a low fellow if he did. Will he have a grain of respect for you? What have you in common with him? He laughs at you and robs you. That is all his love amounts to. You are lucky if he does not beat you. Very likely he does beat you, too. Ask him, if you have got one, whether he will marry you. He will laugh in your face, if he doesn't spit in it or give you a blow. But maybe he is not worth a bad halfpenny himself. And for what have you ruined your life, if you come to think of it? For the coffee that they give you to drink and the plentiful meals? But with what object are they feeding you up? An honest girl couldn't swallow the food, for she would know what she was being fed for. You are in debt here, and, of course, you will always be in debt, and you will go on in debt to the end, till the visitors here begin to scorn you. And that will soon happen. Don't rely upon your youth. All that flies by express train here, you know. You will be kicked out. Not simply kicked out. Long before that she'll begin nagging at you, scolding you, abusing you, as though you had not sacrificed your health for her, had not thrown away your youth and your soul for her benefit, but as though you had ruined her, beggared her, robbed her. And don't expect anyone to take your part. The others, your companions, will attack you, too, win her favor, for all are in slavery here, and have lost all conscience and pity here long ago. They have become utterly vile, and nothing on earth is viler, more loathsome, and more insulting than their abuse. And you are laying down everything here, unconditionally, youth and health and beauty and hope, and at 22 you will look like a woman of 35, and you will be lucky if you are not diseased, pray to God for that. No doubt you are thinking now that you have a gay time and no work to do. Yet there is no work harder or more dreadful in the world or ever has been. One would think that the heart alone would be worn out with tears. And you won't dare to say a word. not half a word when they drive you away from here. You will go away as though you were to blame. You will change to another house, then to a third, then somewhere else, till you come down at last to the Haymarket. There you will be beaten at every turn. That is good manners there. The visitors don't know how to be friendly without beating you. You don't believe that it is so hateful there? Go and look for yourself sometime. You can see with your own eyes. Once, one New Year's Day, I saw a woman at a door. They had turned her out as a joke, to give her a taste of the frost because she had been crying so much, and they shut the door behind her. At 9 o'clock in the morning she was already quite drunk, dishevelled, half naked, covered with bruises. Her face was powdered, but she had a black eye. Blood was trickling from her nose and her teeth. Some cabman had just given her a drubbing. She was sitting on the stone steps, a salt fish of some sort was in her hand. She was crying, wailing something about her luck and beating with the fish on the steps, and cabmen and drunken soldiers were crowding in the doorway taunting her. You don't believe that you will ever be like that? I should be sorry to believe it, too. But how do you know? Maybe 10 years, 8 years ago, that very woman with the salt fish came here fresh as a cherub, innocent, pure, knowing no evil, blushing at every word. Perhaps she was like you, proud, ready to take offense, not like the others. Perhaps she looked like a queen and knew what happiness was in store for the man who should love her and whom she should love. Do you see how it ended? And what if at that very minute when she was beating on the filthy steps with that fish, drunken and dishevelled, what if at that very minute she recalled the pure early days in her father's house, when she used to go to school and the neighbor's son watched for her on the way, declaring that he would love her as long as he lived, that he would devote his life to her, and when they vowed to love one another forever and be married as soon as they were grown up? No, Liza, it would be happy for you if you were to die soon of consumption in some corner, in some cellar like that woman just now. In the hospital, do you say? You will be lucky if they take you. But what if you are still of use to the madam here? Consumption is a queer disease. It is not like fever. The patient goes on hoping till the last minute and says he is all right. He deludes himself, and that just suits your madam. Don't doubt it, that's how it is. You have sold your soul, and what is more, you owe money, so you daren't say a word. But when you are dying, all will abandon you, all will turn away from you, for then there will be nothing to get from you. What's more, they will reproach you for cumbering the place, for being so long over dying. However you beg, you won't get a drink of water without abuse. Whenever are you going off, you nasty hussy? You won't let us sleep with your moaning. You make the gentleman sick. That's true, I have heard such things said myself. They will thrust you dying into the filthiest corner in the cellar, in the damp and the darkness. What will your thoughts be, lying there alone? When you die, strange hands will lay you out, with grumbling and impatience. No one will bless you, no one will sigh for you. They only want to get rid of you as soon as may be. They will buy a coffin, take you to the grave, as they did that poor woman today, and celebrate your memory at the tavern. In the grave, sleet, filth, wet snow. No need to put themselves out for you. Let her down, Vanuha. It's just like her luck. Even here she is head foremost, the hussy. Shorten the cord, you rascal. It's all right as it is. All right, is it? Why, she's on her side. She was a fellow creature, after all. But never mind, throw the earth on her. And they won't care to waste much time quarreling over you. They will scatter the wet blue clay as quick as they can and go off to the tavern, and there your memory on earth will end. Other women have children to go to their graves, fathers, husbands. Well, for you neither tear nor sigh nor remembrance. No one in the whole world will ever come to you. Your name will vanish from the face of the earth, as though you had never existed, never been born at all. Nothing but filth and mud. However you knock at your coffin lid at night, when the dead arise, however you cry, let me out, kind people, to live in the light of day. My life was no life at all. My life has been thrown away like a dish clout. It was drunk away in the tavern at the Haymarket. Let me out, kind people, to live in the world again. and I worked myself up to such a pitch that I began to have a lump in my throat myself, and all at once I stopped, sat up in dismay, and, bending over apprehensively, began to listen with a beating heart. I had reason to be troubled. I had felt for some time that I was turning her soul upside down and rending her heart, and the more I was convinced of it, the more eagerly I desired to gain my object as quickly and as effectually as possible. It was the exercise of my skill that carried me away, yet it was not merely sport. I knew I was speaking stiffly, artificially, even bookishly, in fact. I could not speak except like a book. But that did not trouble me, I knew. I felt that I should be understood and that this very bookishness might be an assistance. But now, having attained my effect, I was suddenly panic-stricken. Never before had I witnessed such despair. She was lying on her face, thrusting her face into the pillow and clutching it in both hands. Her heart was being torn. Her youthful body was shuddering all over as though in convulsions. Suppressed sobs rent her bosom and suddenly burst out in weeping and wailing. Then she pressed closer into the pillow. She did not want anyone here, not a living soul, to know of her anguish and her tears. She bit the pillow, bit her hand till it bled, I saw that afterwards, or, thrusting her fingers into her disheveled hair, seemed rigid with the effort of restraint, holding her breath and clenching her teeth. I began saying something, begging her to calm herself, but felt that I did not dare, and all at once, in a sort of cold shiver, almost in terror, began fumbling in the dark, trying hurriedly to get dressed to go. It was dark, though I tried my best I could not finish dressing quickly. Suddenly I felt a box of matches and a candlestick with a whole candle in it. As soon as the room was lighted up, Liza sprang up, sat up in bed, and with a contorted face, with a half-insane smile, looked at me almost senselessly. I sat down beside her and took her hands. She came to herself, made an impulsive movement towards me, would have caught hold of me, but did not dare, and slowly bowed her head before me. Liza, my dear, I was wrong. Forgive me, my dear, I began, but she squeezed my hand in her fingers so tightly that I felt I was saying the wrong thing, and stopped. This is my address, Liza. Come to me. I will come, she answered resolutely, her head still bowed. But now I am going. Good-bye, till we meet again. I got up. She, too, stood up and suddenly flushed all over, gave a shudder, snatched up a shawl that was lying on a chair and muffled herself in it to her chin. As she did this, she gave another sickly smile, blushed and looked at me strangely. I felt wretched. I was in haste to get away, to disappear. Wait a minute, she said suddenly, in the passage just at the doorway, stopping me with her hand on my overcoat. She put down the candle in hot haste and ran off. Evidently she had thought of something or wanted to show me something. As she ran away she flushed, her eyes shone, and there was a smile on her lips. What was the meaning of it? Against my will I waited. She came back a minute later with an expression that seemed to ask forgiveness for something. In fact, it was not the same face, not the same look as the evening before, sullen, mistrustful, and obstinate. Her eyes now were imploring, soft, and at the same time trustful, caressing, timid. The expression with which children look at people they are very fond of whom they are asking a favor. Her eyes were a light hazel. They were lovely eyes, full of life and capable of expressing love as well as sullen hatred. Making no explanation, as though I, as a sort of higher being, must understand everything without explanations, she held out a piece of paper to me. Her whole face was positively beaming at that instant with naive, almost childish, triumph. I unfolded it. It was a letter to her from a medical student or someone of that sort, a very high-flown and flowery but extremely respectful love letter. I don't recall the words now, but I remember well that through the high-flown phrases there was apparent a genuine feeling, which cannot be feigned. When I had finished reading it, I met her glowing, questioning, and childishly impatient eyes fixed upon me. She fastened her eyes upon my face and waited impatiently for what I should say. In a few words, hurriedly, but with a sort of joy and pride, she explained to me that she had been to a dance somewhere in a private house, a family of very nice people who knew nothing, absolutely nothing, for she had only come here so lately and it had all happened. Then she hadn't made up her mind to stay and was certainly going away as soon as she had paid her debt. And at that party there had been the student who had danced with her all the evening. He talked to her, and it turned out that he had known her in old days at Riga when he was a child. They had played together, but a very long time ago. And he knew her parents, but about this he knew nothing, nothing whatever, and had no suspicion. And the day after the dance, 3 days ago, he had sent her that letter through the friend with whom she had gone to the party, and, well, that was all. She dropped her shining eyes with a sort of bashfulness as she finished. The poor girl was keeping that student's letter as a precious treasure, and had run to fetch it, her only treasure, because she did not want me to go away without knowing that she, too, was honestly and genuinely loved, that she, too, was addressed respectfully. No doubt that letter was destined to lie in her box and lead to nothing. But none the less I am certain that she would keep it all her life as a precious treasure, as her pride and justification. And now at such a minute she had thought of that letter and brought it with naive pride to raise herself in my eyes, that I might see, that I, too, might think well of her. I said nothing, pressed her hand, and went out. I so longed to get away. I walked all the way home, in spite of the fact that the melting snow was still falling in heavy flakes. I was exhausted, shattered, in bewilderment. But behind the bewilderment, the truth was already gleaming. The loathsome truth. End of chapter 7. Recording by Andrew David King. Find me online at www.andrewdavidking.com.
Section 15 of White Nights and Other Stories by Fyodor Dostoevsky. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Notes from Underground by Fyodor Dostoevsky. Translated from the Russian by Constance Garnett. Part 2. Apropos of the wet snow. Chapter 8. It was some time, however, before I consented to recognize that truth. Waking up in the morning after some hours of heavy leaden sleep, and immediately realizing all that had happened on the previous day, I was positively amazed at my last night's sentimentality with Liza, at all those outcries of horror and pity. To think of having such an attack of womanish hysteria! Pah! I concluded. And what did I thrust my address upon her for? What if she comes? Let her come, though. It doesn't matter. But obviously that was not now the chief and most important matter. I had to make haste and at all costs save my reputation in the eyes of Zverkov and Simonov as quickly as possible. That was the chief business. And I was so taken up that morning that I actually forgot all about Liza. First of all, I had at once to repay what I had borrowed the day before from Simonov. I resolved on a desperate measure: to borrow 15 roubles straight off from Anton Antonitch. As luck would have it, he was in the best of humours that morning and gave it to me at once, on the first asking. I was so delighted at this that as I signed the IOU with a swaggering air, I told him casually that the night before I had been keeping it up with some friends at the Hôtel de Paris. We were giving a farewell party to a comrade, in fact, I might say a friend of my childhood, and you know, a desperate rake, fearfully spoilt. Of course he belongs to a good family and has considerable means, a brilliant career. He is witty, charming, a regular Lovelace, you understand. We drank an extra half dozen, and it went off all right. All this was uttered very easily, unconstrainedly, and complacently. On reaching home I promptly wrote to Simonov. To this hour I am lost in admiration when I recall the truly gentlemanly, good humoured, candid tone of my letter. With tact and good breeding, and above all, entirely without superfluous words, I blamed myself for all that had happened. I defended myself, if I really may be allowed to defend myself, by alleging that being utterly unaccustomed to wine, I had been intoxicated with the first glass, which I said I had drunk before they arrived, while I was waiting for them at the Hôtel de Paris, between 5 and 6 o'clock. I begged Simonov's pardon especially. I asked him to convey my explanations to all the others, especially to Zverkov, whom I seemed to remember as though in a dream I had insulted. I added that I would have called upon all of them myself, but my head ached, and besides I had not the face to. I was particularly pleased with a certain lightness, almost carelessness, strictly within the bounds of politeness, however, which was apparent in my style, and better than any possible arguments, gave them at once to understand that I took rather an independent view of all that unpleasantness last night, that I was by no means so utterly crushed as you, my friends, probably imagine, but on the contrary looked upon it as a gentleman serenely respecting himself should look upon it. On a young hero's past no censure is cast. There is actually an aristocratic playfulness about it, I thought admiringly, as I read over the letter, and it's all because I am an intellectual and cultivated man. Another man in my place would not have known how to extricate himself, but here I have got out of it and am as jolly as ever again, and all because I am a cultivated and educated man of our day. And indeed, perhaps everything was due to the wine yesterday. No, it was not the wine. I did not drink anything at all between 5 and 6, when I was waiting for them. I had lied to Simonov. I had lied shamelessly. And indeed I wasn't ashamed now. Hang it all, though, the great thing was that I was rid of it. I put 6 roubles in the letter, sealed it up, and asked Apollon to take it to Simonov. When he learned that there was money in the letter, Apollon became more respectful and agreed to take it. Towards evening I went out for a walk. My head was still aching and giddy after yesterday. But as evening came on and the twilight grew denser, my impressions, and, following them, my thoughts, grew more and more different and confused. Something was not dead within me. In the depths of my heart and conscience it would not die, and it showed itself in acute depression. For the most part I jostled my way through the most crowded business streets, along Myasnitsky Street, along Sadovy Street, and in Yusupov Garden. I always liked particularly sauntering along these streets in the dusk, just when there were crowds of working people of all sorts going home from their daily work, with faces looking cross with anxiety. What I liked was just that cheap bustle, that bare prose. On this occasion the jostling of the streets irritated me more than ever. I could not make out what was wrong with me. I could not find the clue. Something seemed rising up continually in my soul, painfully, and refusing to be appeased. I returned home completely upset. It was just as though some crime were lying on my conscience. The thought that Liza was coming worried me continually. It seemed queer to me that of all my recollections of yesterday, this tormented me, as it were, especially, as it were, quite separately. Everything else I had quite succeeded in forgetting by the evening. I dismissed it all, and was still perfectly satisfied with my letter to Simonov. But on this point I was not satisfied at all. It was as though I were worried only by Liza. What if she comes? I thought incessantly. Well, it doesn't matter, let her come. It's horrid that she should see, for instance, how I live. Yesterday I seemed such a hero to her, while now, It's horrid, though, that I have let myself go so. The room looks like a beggar's. And I brought myself to go out to dinner in such a suit, and my American leather sofa with the stuffing sticking out, and my dressing gown, which will not cover me, such tatters. And she will see all this, and she will see Apollon. That beast is certain to insult her. he will fasten upon her in order to be rude to me. And I, of course, shall be panic stricken as usual. I shall begin bowing and scraping before her, and pulling my dressing gown round me. I shall begin smiling, telling lies. Oh, the beastliness! And it isn't the beastliness of it that matters most. There is something more important, more loathsome, viler. Yes, viler. And to put on that dishonest, lying mask again. When I reached that thought I fired up all at once. Why dishonest? How dishonest? I was speaking sincerely last night. I remember there was real feeling in me too. What I wanted was to excite an honourable feeling in her. Her crying was a good thing. It will have a good effect. Yet I could not feel at ease. All that evening, even when I had come back home, even after 9 o'clock, when I calculated that Liza could not possibly come, still she haunted me. And what was worse, she came back to my mind always in the same position. One moment out of all that had happened last night stood vividly before my imagination. The moment when I struck a match and saw her pale, distorted face with its look of torture, and what a pitiful, what an unnatural, what a distorted smile she had at that moment. But I did not know then that 15 years later I should still in my imagination see Liza, always with that pitiful, distorted, inappropriate smile which was on her face at that minute. Next day I was ready again to look upon it all as nonsense, due to over-excited nerves, and, above all, as exaggerated. I was always conscious of that weak point of mine, and sometimes very much afraid of it. I exaggerate everything. That is where I go wrong, I repeated to myself every hour. But, however, Liza will very likely come all the same, was the refrain with which all my reflections ended. I was so uneasy that I sometimes flew into a fury. She'll come, she is certain to come, I cried, running about the room. If not to day, she will come to morrow. She'll find me out. The damnable romanticism of these pure hearts. Oh, the vileness, oh, the silliness, oh, the stupidity of these wretched sentimental souls. Why, how fail to understand? How could one fail to understand? But at this point I stopped short, and in great confusion indeed. And how few words, I thought in passing, were needed. How little of the idyllic, and affectedly, bookishly, artificially idyllic too, had sufficed to turn a whole human life at once according to my will. That's virginity, to be sure, freshness of soil. At times a thought occurred to me to go to her, to tell her all, and beg her not to come to me. But this thought stirred such wrath in me that I believed I should have crushed that damned Liza if she had chanced to be near me at the time. I should have insulted her, have spat at her, have turned her out, have struck her. One day passed, however, another, and another. She did not come, and I began to grow calmer. I felt particularly bold and cheerful after 9 o'clock. I even sometimes began dreaming, and rather sweetly. I, for instance, became the salvation of Liza, simply through her coming to me and my talking to her. I develop her, educate her. Finally, I notice that she loves me passionately. I pretend not to understand. I don't know, however, why I pretend, just for effect perhaps. At last, all confusion, transfigured, trembling and sobbing, she flings herself at my feet and says that I am her saviour, and that she loves me better than anything in the world. I am amazed, but Liza, I say, can you imagine that I have not noticed your love? I saw it all, I divined it, but I did not dare to approach you first, because I had an influence over you, and was afraid that you would force yourself, from gratitude, to respond to my love, would try to rouse in your heart a feeling which was perhaps absent, and I did not wish that, because it would be tyranny, it would be indelicate. In short, I launch off at that point into European, inexplicably lofty subtleties a la George Sand. But now you are mine. You are my creation, you are pure, you are good, you are my noble wife. Into my house come bold and free, its rightful mistress there to be. Then we begin living together, go abroad, and so on, and so on. In fact, in the end it seemed vulgar to me myself, and I began putting out my tongue at myself. Besides, they won't let her out, the hussy, I thought. They don't let them go out very readily, especially in the evening. For some reason I fancied she would come in the evening, and at 7 o'clock precisely. Though she did say she was not altogether a slave there yet, and had certain rights. So, damn it all, she will come, she is sure to come. It was a good thing, in fact, that Apollon distracted my attention at that time by his rudeness. He drove me beyond all patience. He was the bane of my life, the curse laid upon me by Providence. We had been squabbling continually for years, and I hated him. My God, how I hated him! I believe I had never hated any one in my life as I hated him, especially at some moments. He was an elderly, dignified man who worked part of his time as a tailor. But for some unknown reason he despised me beyond all measure, and looked down upon me insufferably, though indeed he looked down upon every one. Simply to glance at that flaxen, smoothly brushed head, at the tuft of hair he combed up on his forehead and oiled with sunflower oil, at that dignified mouth, compressed into the shape of the letter V, made one feel one was confronting a man who never doubted of himself. He was a pedant to the most extreme point, the greatest pedant I had met on earth, and with that had a vanity only befitting Alexander of Macedon. He was in love with every button on his coat, every nail on his fingers, absolutely in love with them, and he looked it. In his behaviour to me he was a perfect tyrant. He spoke very little to me, and if he chanced to glance at me, he gave me a firm, majestically self-confident, and invariably ironical look that drove me sometimes to fury. He did his work with the air of doing me the greatest favour, though he did scarcely anything for me, and did not, indeed, consider himself bound to do anything. There could be no doubt that he looked upon me as the greatest fool on earth, and that he did not get rid of me was simply that he could get wages from me every month. He consented to do nothing for me for 7 roubles a month. Many sins should be forgiven me for what I suffered from him. My hatred reached such a point that sometimes his very step almost threw me into convulsions. What I loathed particularly was his lisp. His tongue must have been a little too long, or something of that sort, for he continually lisped, and seemed to be very proud of it, imagining that it greatly added to his dignity. He spoke in a slow, measured tone, with his hands behind his back and his eyes fixed on the ground. He maddened me particularly when he read aloud the Psalms to himself behind his partition. Many a battle I waged over that reading, but he was awfully fond of reading aloud in the evenings in a slow, even, sing-song voice, as though over the dead. It is interesting that that is how he is ended. He hires himself out to read the Psalms over the dead, and at the same time he kills rats and makes blacking. But at that time I could not get rid of him. It was as though he were chemically combined with my existence. Besides, nothing would have induced him to consent to leave me. I could not live in furnished lodgings. My lodging was my private solitude, my shell, my cave, in which I concealed myself from all mankind, and Apollon seemed to me, for some reason, an integral part of that flat, and for 7 years I could not turn him away. To be 2 or 3 days behind with his wages, for instance, was impossible. He would have made such a fuss, I should not have known where to hide my head. But I was so exasperated with every one during those days, that I made up my mind for some reason, and with some object to punish Apollon, and not pay him for a fortnight the wages that were owing him. I had for a long time, for the last 2 years, been intending to do this, simply in order to teach him not to give himself airs with me, and to show him that if I liked I could withhold his wages. I purposed to say nothing to him about it, and was purposely silent, indeed, in order to score off his pride and force him to be the first to speak of his wages. Then I would take the 7 roubles out of a drawer, show him I have the money put aside on purpose, but that I won't. I simply won't pay him his wages. I won't, just because that is what I wish, because I am master and it is for me to decide, because he has been disrespectful, because he has been rude. But if he were to ask respectfully, I might be softened and give it to him. Respectfully, I might be softened and give it to him. Respectfully, I might be softened and give it to him.
Section 17 of White Nights and Other Stories by Fyodor Dostoevsky. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Karina Schultz. A Faint Heart by Fyodor Dostoevsky. Translated from the Russian by Constance Garnett. Part 1. Under the same roof, in the same flat, on the same 4th story, lived 2 young men, colleagues in the service, Arkady Ivanovitch Nefedovitch and Vasya Shumkov. The author, of course, feels the necessity of explaining to the reader why one is given his full title, while the other's name is abbreviated, if only that such a mode of expression may not be regarded as unseemly and rather familiar. But to do so, it would first be necessary to explain and describe the rank and years and calling and duty in the service, and even, indeed, the characters of the persons concerned. And since there are so many writers who begin in that way, the author of the proposed story, solely in order to be unlike them, that is, some people will perhaps say entirely on account of his boundless vanity, decides to begin straight away with action. Having completed this introduction, he begins. Toward 6 o'clock on New Year's Eve, Shumkov returned home. Arkady Ivanovitch, who was lying on the bed, woke up and looked at his friend with half-closed eyes. He saw that Vasya had on his very best trousers and a very clean shirt front. That, of course, struck him. Where had Vasya to go like that? And he had not dined at home either. Meanwhile, Shumkov had lighted a candle, and Arkady Ivanovitch guessed immediately that his friend was intending to wake him accidentally. Vasya did, in fact, clear his throat twice, walked twice up and down the room, and at last, quite accidentally, let the pipe, which he had begun filling in the corner by the stove, slip out of his hands. Arkady Ivanovitch laughed to himself. "Vasya, give over pretending," he said. "Arkasha, you are not asleep?" "I really cannot say for certain. It seems to me I am not." "Oh, Arkasha, how are you, dear boy? Well, brother, you don't know what I have to tell you." "I certainly don't know. Come here." As though expecting this, Vasya went up to him at once, not at all anticipating, however, treachery from Arkady Ivanovitch. The other seized him very adroitly by the arms, turned him over, held him down, and began, as it is called, strangling his victim. And apparently this proceeding afforded the light-hearted Arkady Ivanovitch great satisfaction. "Caught!" he cried. "Caught!" Arkasha, what are you about? Let me go! For goodness sake, let me go, I shall crumple my dress coat." "As though that mattered. What do you want with the dress coat? Why were you so confiding as to put yourself in my hands? Tell me, where have you been? Where have you dined?" "Arkasha, for goodness sake, let me go." "Where have you dined?" "Why, it's about that I want to tell you." "Tell away, then." "But first let me go." "Not a bit of it. I won't let you go till you tell me." Arkasha! "But do you understand? I can't. It is utterly impossible," cried Vasya, helplessly wriggling out of his friend's powerful clutches. "You know there are subjects." "How subjects?" "Why, subjects that you can't talk about in such a position without losing your dignity. It's utterly impossible. It would make it ridiculous, and this is not a ridiculous matter. It is important." "Here, he's going in for being important. That's a new idea. You tell me so as to make me laugh, that's how you must tell me. I don't want anything important, or else you are no true friend of mine. Do you call yourself a friend, eh? Arkasha, I really can't. Well, I don't want to hear. Well, Arkasha, began Vasya, lying across the bed and doing his utmost to put all the dignity possible into his words. Arkasha, if you like, I will tell you, only... Well, what? Well, I am engaged to be married. Without uttering another word, Arkady Ivanovitch took Vasya up in his arms like a baby, though the latter was by no means short, but rather long and thin, and began dexterously carrying him up and down the room, pretending that he was hushing him to sleep. "I'll put you in your swaddling clothes, master bridegroom," he kept saying. But seeing that Vasya lay in his arms, not stirring or uttering a word, he thought better of it at once, and reflecting that the joke had gone too far, set him down in the middle of the room and kissed him on the cheek in the most genuine and friendly way. "Vasya, you are not angry?" "Arkasha, listen." "Come, it's New Year's Eve." "Oh, I'm all right. But why are you such a madman, such a scatterbrain? How many times have I told you? Arkasha, it's really not funny at all." "Oh, well, you are not angry?" "Oh, I'm all right. Am I ever angry with anyone? But you have wounded me, do you understand?" "But how have I wounded you? In what way?" "I come to you as a friend, with a full heart, to pour out my soul to you, to tell you of my happiness." "What happiness? Why don't you speak?" "Oh, well, I am going to get married," Vasya answered with vexation, for he really was a little exasperated. "You? You are going to get married? So you really mean it?" Arkasha cried at the top of his voice. "No, no, but what's this? He talks like this and his tears are flowing. Vasya, my little Vasya, don't, my little son, is it true, really?" And Arkady Ivanovitch flew to hug him again. "Well, do you see how it is now?" said Vasya. "You are kind, of course, you are a friend, I know that. I come to you with such joy, such rapture, and all of a sudden I have to disclose all the joy of my heart, all my rapture struggling across the bed in an undignified way. You understand, Arkasha," Vasya went on, half laughing. "You see, it made it seem comic, and in a sense I did not belong to myself at that minute. I could not let this be slighted. What's more, if you had asked me her name, I swear I would sooner you killed me than have answered you." "But, Vasya, why did you not speak? You should have told me all about it sooner, and I would not have played the fool," cried Arkady Ivanovitch in genuine despair. "Come, that's enough, that's enough. Of course, that's how it is. You know what it all comes from my having a good heart. What vexes me is that I could not tell you as I wanted to, making you glad and happy, telling you nicely and initiating you into my secret properly. Really, Arkasha, I love you so much that I believe if it were not for you I shouldn't be getting married, and in fact I shouldn't be living in this world at all." Arkady Ivanovitch, who was excessively sentimental, cried and laughed at once as he listened to Vasya. Vasya did the same. Both flew to embrace one another again and forgot the past. "How is it? How is it? Tell me all about it, Vasya. I am astonished. Excuse me, brother, but I am utterly astonished. It's a perfect thunderbolt, by Jove. Nonsense, nonsense, brother, you have made it up. You've really made it up. You are telling fibs," cried Arkady Ivanovitch. And he actually looked into Vasya's face with genuine uncertainty, but seeing in it the radiant confirmation of a positive intention of being married as soon as possible, threw himself on the bed and began rolling from side to side in ecstasy till the walls shook. "Vasya, sit here," he said at last, sitting down on the bed. "I really don't know, brother, where to begin." They looked at one another in joyful excitement. "Who is she, Vasya?" "The Artemyevs," Vasya pronounced in a voice weak with emotion. "No." "Well, I did buzz into your ears about them at first, and then I shut up and you noticed nothing. Ah, Arkasha, if you knew how hard it was to keep it from you. But I was afraid to speak. I thought it would all go wrong, and you know I was in love, Arkasha. My God, my God. You see, this was the trouble," he began, pausing continually from agitation. "She had a suitor a year ago. but he was suddenly ordered somewhere. I knew him, he was a fellow, bless him. Well, he did not write at all, he simply vanished. They waited and waited, wondering what it meant. 4 months ago he suddenly came back married, and has never set foot within their doors. It was coarse, shabby, and they had no one to stand up for them. She cried and cried, poor girl, and I fell in love with her. Indeed, I had been in love with her long before, all the time. I began comforting her, and was always going there. Well, and I really don't know how it has all come about, only she came to love me. A week ago I could not restrain myself. I cried, I sobbed, and told her everything, well, that I love her, everything. In fact, I am ready to love you too, Vasily Petrovitch, only I am a poor girl, don't make a mock of me. I don't dare to love anyone. Well, brother, you understand. You understand? On that we got engaged on the spot. I kept thinking and thinking and thinking and thinking. I said to her, "How are we to tell your mother?" She said, "It will be hard. Wait a little. She's afraid, and now maybe she would not let you have me. She keeps crying, too." Without telling her, I blurted it out to her mother today. Lizanka fell on her knees before her. I did the same. Well, she gave us her blessing. "Arkasha, Arkasha, my dear fellow, we will live together. No, I won't part from you for anything." Vasya, look at you as I may, I can't believe it. I don't believe it, I swear. I keep feeling as though... Listen, how can you be engaged to be married? How is it I didn't know, eh? Do you know, Vasya, I will confess it to you now. I was thinking of getting married myself, but now, since you are going to be married, it is just as good. Be happy, be happy. Brother, I feel so light-hearted now. There is such sweetness in my soul," said Vasya, getting up and pacing about the room excitedly. "Don't you feel the same? We shall be poor, of course, but we shall be happy. And you know it is not a wild fancy. Our happiness is not a fairy tale. We shall be happy in reality." "Vasya, Vasya, listen!" "What?" said Vasya, standing before Arkady Ivanovitch. "The idea occurs to me. I am really afraid to say it to you. Forgive me and settle my doubts. What are you going to live on? You know I am delighted that you are going to be married, of course. I am delighted, and I don't know what to do with myself. But what are you going to live on, eh?" "Oh, good heavens! What a fellow you are, Arkasha," said Vasya, looking at Nefedevitch in profound astonishment. "What do you mean? Even her old mother, even she did not think of that for 2 minutes when I put it all clearly before her. You had better ask what they are living on. They have 500 roubles a year between the three of them. The pension, which is all they have, since the father died. She and her old mother and her little brother, whose schooling is paid for out of that income too, that is how they live. It's you and I are the capitalists. Some good years it works out to as much as 700 for me. I say, Vasya, excuse me. I really... You know, I am only thinking how to prevent things going wrong. How do you mean 700? It's only 300. 300! And Yulian Mastakovitch? Have you forgotten him? Yulian Mastakovitch? But you know that's uncertain, brother. That's not the same thing as 300 roubles of secure salary, where every rouble is a friend you can trust. Yulian Mastakovitch, of course. He's a great man. In fact, I respect him. I understand him, though he is so far above us. And by Jove, I love him, because he likes you and gives you something for your work, though he might not pay you, but simply order a clerk to work for him. But you will agree, Vasya. Let me tell you too, I am not talking nonsense. I admit in all Petersburg you won't find a handwriting like your handwriting. I am ready to allow that to you," Nefedevitch concluded, not without enthusiasm. "But God forbid! You may displease him all at once. You may not satisfy him. Your work with him may stop. He may take another clerk, all sorts of things may happen. In fact, you know Yulian Mastakovitch may be here today and gone tomorrow. Well, Arkasha, the ceiling might fall on our heads this minute. Oh, of course, I mean nothing. But listen, hear what I have got to say, you know. I don't see how he can part with me. No, hear what I have to say. Hear what I have to say. You see, I perform all my duties punctually. You know how kind he is. You know, Arkasha, he gave me 50 roubles in silver today." "Did he really, Vasya? A bonus for you?" "Bonus indeed. It was out of his own pocket. He said, 'Why, you have had no money for 5 months, brother. Take some if you want it. Thank you, I am satisfied with you.' Yes, really. 'Yes, you don't work for me for nothing,' said he. He did indeed, that's what he said. It brought tears into my eyes, Arkasha. Good heavens, yes. I say, Vasya, have you finished copying those papers?" "No, I haven't finished them yet." "Vasya, my angel, what have you been doing?" "Listen, Arkasha, it doesn't matter. They are not wanted for another 2 days. I have time enough." "How is it you have not done them?" "That's all right, that's all right. You look so horror-stricken that you turn me inside out and make my heart ache. You are always going on at me like this. He's forever crying out, 'Oh, oh, oh.' Only consider, what does it matter? Why, I shall finish it, of course I shall finish it." "What if you don't finish it?" cried Arkady, jumping up. "And he has made you a present to-day, and you going to be married. Tut, tut, tut." "It's all right, it's all right," cried Shumkov. "I shall sit down directly. I shall sit down this minute." "How did you come to leave it, Vasya?" "Oh, Arkasha, how could I sit down to work? Have I been in a fit state? Why, even at the office I could scarcely sit still. I could scarcely bear the beating of my heart. Oh, oh, now I shall work all night, and I shall work all tomorrow night, and the night after too, and I shall finish it." "Is there a great deal left?" "Don't hinder me, for goodness' sake, don't hinder me. Hold your tongue." Arkady Ivanovitch went on tiptoe to the bed and sat down, and then suddenly wanted to get up, but was obliged to sit down again, remembering that he might interrupt him, though he could not sit still for excitement. It was evident that the news had thoroughly upset him, and the first thrill of delight had not yet passed off. He glanced at Shumkov, the latter glanced at him, smiled, and shook his finger at him. Then, frowning severely, as though all his energy and the success of his work depended upon it, fixed his eyes on the papers. It seemed that he too could not yet master his emotion. He kept changing his pen, fidgeting in his chair, rearranging things, and setting to work again, but his hand trembled and refused to move. "Arkasha, I've talked to them about you," he cried suddenly, as though he had just remembered it. "Yes?" cried Arkasha. "I was just wanting to ask you that. Well?" "Well, I'll tell you everything afterwards. Of course, it is my own fault, but it quite went out of my head that I didn't mean to say anything till I had written 4 pages. But I thought of you and of them. I really can't write, brother. I keep thinking about you." Vasya smiled. A silence followed. "Phew, what a horrid pen!" cried Shumkov, flinging it on the table in vexation. He took another. "Vasya, listen, one word." "Well, make haste, and for the last time." "Have you a great deal left to do?" "Ah, brother," Vasya frowned, as though there could be nothing more terrible and murderous in the whole world than such a question. "A lot, a fearful lot." "Do you know, I have an idea." "What?" "Oh, never mind, go on writing." "Why, what? What?" "It's past 6, Vasya." Here Nefedevitch smiled and winked slyly at Vasya, though with a certain timidity, not knowing how Vasya would take it. "Well, what is it?" said Vasya, throwing down his pen, looking him straight in the face and actually turning pale with excitement. "Do you know what?" "For goodness' sake, what is it?" "I tell you what, you are excited, you won't get much done. Stop, stop, stop!" "I have it, I have it, listen," said Nefedevitch, jumping up from the bed in delight, preventing Vasya from speaking and doing his utmost to ward off all objections. "First of all, you must get calm, you must pull yourself together, mustn't you?" "Arkasha, Arkasha," cried Vasya, jumping up from his chair, "I will work all night, I will, really." Of course, you won't go to bed till morning." "I won't go to bed, I won't go to bed at all." "No, that won't do. That won't do. You must sleep. Go to bed at 5. I will call you at 8. Tomorrow is a holiday. You can sit and scribble away all day long. Then the night and... But have you a great deal left to do? Yes, look, look. Vasya, quivering with excitement and suspense, showed the manuscript. Look. I say, brother, that's not much. My dear fellow, there's some more of it, said Vasya, looking very timidly at Nefedevitch, as though the decision whether he was to go or not depended upon the latter. How much? 2 signatures? Well, what's that? Come, I tell you what. We shall have time to finish it. By Jove, we shall. Arkasha? Vasya, listen. Tonight, on New Year's Eve, every one is at home with his family. You and I are the only ones without a home or relations. Oh, Vasya! Nefedevitch clutched Vasya and hugged him in his leonine arms. Arkasha, it's settled. Vasya, boy, I only wanted to say this. You see, Vasya, listen. Bandy-legs, listen. Arkady stopped, with his mouth open, because he could not speak for delight. Vasya held him by the shoulders, gazed into his face, and moved his lips as though he wanted to speak for him. " Well," he brought out at last, " introduce me to them to-day." " Arkady, let's go to tea there. I tell you what, we won't even stay to see in the New Year, we'll come away earlier," cried Vasya, with genuine inspiration. " That is, we'll go for 2 hours, neither more nor less. And then separation till I have finished. Vasya, boy. Arkady!" 3 minutes later Arkady was dressed in his best. Vasya did nothing but brush himself, because he had been in such haste to work that he had not changed his trousers. They hurried out into the street, each more pleased than the other. End of Part 1.
Section 23 of White Nights and Other Stories by Fyodor Dostoevsky. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Iskra Nikolova. Polzunkov by Fyodor Dostoevsky. Translated from the Russian by Constance Garnett. Part 2. Well, now I will go on. He drew me, if you will kindly remember, more dead than alive, into the room where they were having tea. They all met me seeming as it were offended, that is, not exactly offended, but hurt. So hurt that it was simply, they seemed shattered, absolutely shattered, and at the same time there was a look of becoming dignity on their faces, a gravity in their expression, something fatherly, parental. The prodigal son had come back to them. That's what it had come to. They made me sit down to tea, but there was no need to do that. I felt as though a samovar was toiling in my bosom, and my feet were like ice. I was humbled, I was cowed. Marya Fominishna, his wife, addressed me familiarly from the first word. " How is it you have grown so thin, my boy? "" I've not been very well, Marya Fominishna," I said. My wretched voice shook. And then, quite suddenly, she must have been waiting for a chance to get a dig at me, the old snake, she said, " I suppose your conscience felt ill at ease, Osip Mihalitch, my dear. Our fatherly hospitality was a reproach to you. You have been punished for the tears I have shed." Yes, upon my word, she really said that. She had the conscience to say it. Why, that was nothing to her. She was a terror. She did nothing but sit there and pour out tea. But if you were in the market, my darling, I thought, you'd shout louder than any fishwife there. That's the kind of woman she was. And then, to my undoing, the daughter, Marya Fedosyevna, came in all her innocence, a little pale, and her eyes red as though she had been weeping. I was bowled over on the spot like a fool. But it turned out afterwards that the tears were a tribute to the cavalry officer. He had made tracks for home and taken his hook for good and all. For you know it was high time for him to be off. I may as well mention the fact here. Not that his leave was up precisely, but you see, it was only later that the loving parents grasped the position and had found out all that had happened. What could they do? They hushed their trouble up, an addition to the family. Well, I could not help it. As soon as I looked at her, I was done for. I stole a glance at my hat. I wanted to get up and make off. But there was no chance of that. They took away my hat. I must confess, I did think of getting off without it. Well, I thought. But no, they latched the doors. There followed friendly jokes, winking, little airs and graces. I was overcome with embarrassment, said something stupid, talked nonsense about love. My charmer sat down to the piano and with an air of wounded feeling sang the song about the hussar who leaned upon the sword. That finished me off. " Well," said Fedosey Nikolaitch, " all is forgotten, come to my arms." I fell just as I was, with my face on his waistcoat. " My benefactor, you are a father to me," said I, and I shed floods of hot tears. Lord have mercy on us, what a to-do there was ! He cried, his good lady cried, Mashenka cried. There was a flaxen-headed creature there, she cried too. That wasn't enough. The younger children crept out of all the corners, the Lord had filled their quiver full, and they howled too. Such tears, such emotion, such joy. They found their prodigal. It was like a soldier's return to his home. Then followed refreshments, we played forfeits, and " I have a pain, where is it ? In my heart. Who gave it you ?" My charmer blushed. The old man and I had some punch. They won me over and did for me completely. I returned to my grandmother with my head in a whirl. I was laughing all the way home. For full 2 hours I paced up and down our little room. I waked up my old granny and told her of my happiness. " But did he give you any money, the brigand ?"" He did, granny, he did, my dear. Luck has come to us all of a heap. We've only to open our hand and take it." I waked up Safron. " Safron," I said, " take off my boots." Safron pulled off my boots. " Come, Safron, congratulate me now, give me a kiss. I'm going to get married, my lad. I'm going to get married. You can get jolly drunk to-morrow. You can have a spree, my dear soul. Your master is getting married." My heart was full of jokes and laughter. I was beginning to drop off to sleep, but something made me get up again. I sat in thought. To-morrow is the 1st of April, a bright and playful day. What should I do? And I thought of something. Why, gentlemen, I got out of bed, lighted a candle, and sat down to the writing table just as I was. I was in a fever of excitement, quite carried away. You know, gentlemen, what it is when a man is quite carried away. I wallowed joyfully in the mud, my dear friends. You see what I'm like. They take something from you, and you give them something else as well, and say, ' Take that too.' They strike you on the cheek, and in your joy you offer them your whole back. Then they try to lure you like a dog with a bun, and you embrace them with your foolish paws and fall to kissing them with all your heart and soul. Why, see what I'm doing now, gentlemen. You're laughing and whispering, I see it. After I have told you all my story, you will begin to turn me into ridicule, you will begin to attack me, but yet I go on talking and talking and talking. And who tells me to? Who drives me to do it? Who is standing behind my back whispering to me, ' Speak, speak, and tell them.' And yet I do talk, I go on telling you. I try to please you, as though you were my brothers, all my dearest friends. Eh !" The laughter, which had sprung up by degrees on all sides, completely drowned at last the voice of the speaker, who really seemed worked up into a sort of ecstasy. He paused, for several minutes his eyes strayed about the company, then suddenly, as though carried away by a whirlwind, he waved his hand, burst out laughing himself, as though he really found his position amusing, and fell to telling his story again. I scarcely slept all night, gentlemen. I was scribbling all night. You see, I thought of a trick. Gentlemen, the very thought of it makes me ashamed. It wouldn't have been so bad if it all had been done at night. I might have been drunk, blundered, been silly and talked nonsense, but not a bit of it. I woke up in the morning as soon as it was light. I hadn't slept more than an hour or two, and was in the same mind. I dressed, I washed, I curled and pomaded my hair, put on my new dress coat, and went straight off to spend the holiday with Fedosey Nikolaitch, and I kept the joke I had written in my hat. He met me again with open arms and invited me again to his fatherly waistcoat. But I assumed an air of dignity. I had the joke I thought of the night before in my mind. I drew a step back. " No, Fedosey Nikolaitch, but will you please read this letter ?" And I gave it him together with my daily report. And do you know what was in it? Why, for such and such reasons the aforesaid Osip Mihalitch asks to be discharged. And under my petition I signed my full rank. Just think what a notion ! Good Lord, it was the cleverest thing I could think of. As to day was the 1st of April, I was pretending, for the sake of a joke, that my resentment was not over, that I had changed my mind in the night and was grumpy and more offended than ever, as though to say, ' My dear benefactor, I don't want to know you nor your daughter either. I put the money in my pocket yesterday, so I am secure. So here's my petition for a transfer to be discharged. I don't care to serve under such a chief as Fedosey Nikolaitch. I want to go into a different office, and then maybe I'll inform.' I pretended to be a regular scoundrel. I wanted to frighten them. And a nice way of frightening them, wasn't it? A pretty thing, gentlemen, wasn't it? You see, my heart had grown tender towards them since the day before, so I thought I would have a little joke at the family. I would tease the fatherly heart of Fedosey Nikolaitch. As soon as he took my letter and opened it, I saw his whole countenance change. ' What's the meaning of this, Osip Mihalitch ?' And like a little fool I said, ' The 1st of April. Many happy returns of the day, Fedosey Nikolaitch.' Just like a silly schoolboy who hides behind his grandmother's armchair and then shouts ' Oof ' into her ear suddenly at the top of his voice, meaning to frighten her. Yes, yes, I feel quite ashamed to talk about it, gentlemen. No, I won't tell you. "' Nonsense ! What happened then ?'' Nonsense, nonsense, tell us, yes, do !' rose on all sides. " There was an outcry and a hullabaloo, my dear friends. Such exclamations of surprise !' And you mischievous fellow !'' You naughty man !' And what a fright I had given them ! And all so sweet that I felt ashamed and wondered how such a holy place could be profaned by a sinner like me. ' Well, my dear boy,' piped the mamma, ' you gave me such a fright that my legs are all of a tremble still. I can hardly stand on my feet. I ran to Masha as though I were crazy. ' Mashenka,' I said, ' what will become of us ? See how your friend has turned out. And I was unjust to you, my dear boy. You must forgive an old woman like me. I was taken in. Well, I thought, when he got home last night, he got home late. He began thinking, and perhaps he fancied that we sent for him on purpose yesterday, that we wanted to get hold of him. I turned cold at the thought. Give over, Mashenka, don't go on winking at me. Osip Mihalitch isn't a stranger. I am your mother. I am not likely to say any harm. Thank God I am not 20, but turned 45. Well, gentlemen, I almost flopped at her feet on the spot. Again there were tears, again there were kisses, jokes began. Fedosey Nikolaitch, too, thought he would make April fools of us. He told us the fiery bird had flown up with a letter in her diamond beak. He tried to take us in, too. Didn't we laugh ? Weren't we touched ? Foo, I feel ashamed to talk about it. Well, my good friends, the end is not far off now. One day passed, 2, 3, a week. I was regularly engaged to her. I should think so. The wedding rings were ordered, the day was fixed, only they did not want to make it public for a time. They wanted to wait for the inspector's visit to be over. I was all impatience for the inspector's arrival. My happiness depended upon him. I was in a hurry to get his visit over. And in the excitement and rejoicing, Fedosey Nikolaitch threw all the work upon me, writing up the accounts, making up the reports, checking the books, balancing the totals. I found things in terrible disorder. Everything had been neglected. There were muddles and irregularities everywhere. Well, I thought, I must do my best for my father-in-law. And he was ailing all the time. He was taken ill, it appears. He seemed to get worse day by day. And indeed I grew as thin as a rake myself. I was afraid I would break down. However, I finished the work grandly. I got things straight for him in time. Suddenly they sent a messenger for me. I ran headlong. What could it be? I saw my Fedosey Nikolaitch, his head bandaged up in a vinegar compress, frowning, sighing, and moaning. " My dear boy, my son," he said, " if I die, to whom shall I leave you, my darlings ?" His wife trailed in with all his children. Mashenka was in tears, and I blubbered too. " Oh, no," he said, " God will be merciful. He will not visit my transgressions on you." Then he dismissed them all, told me to shut the door after them, and we were left alone, tete a tete. " I have a favour to ask of you." " What favour ?"" Well, my dear boy, there is no rest for me even on my death bed. I am in want." " How so ?" I positively flushed crimson, I could hardly speak. " Why, I had to pay some of my own money into the treasury. I grudge nothing for the public weal, my boy. I don't grudge my life. Don't you imagine any ill. I am sad to think that slanderers have blackened my name to you. You were mistaken. My hair has gone white from grief. The inspector is coming down upon us, and Matveyev is 7,000 roubles short, and I shall have to answer for it. Who else? It will be visited upon me, my boy. Where were my eyes? And how can we get it from Matveyev? He has had trouble enough already. Why should I bring the poor fellow to ruin? Holy saints, I thought, what a just man, what a heart! And I don't want to take my daughter's money, which has been set aside for her dowry. That sum is sacred. I have money of my own, it's true, but I have lent it all to friends. How is one to collect it all in a minute? I simply fell on my knees before him. " My benefactor," I cried, " I have wronged you, I have injured you. It was slanderers who wrote against you. Don't break my heart. Take back your money." He looked at me, and there were tears in his eyes. " That was just what I expected from you, my son. Get up. I forgave you at the time for the sake of my daughter's tears. Now my heart forgives you freely. You have healed my wounds. I bless you for all time." Well, when he blessed me, gentlemen, I scurried home as soon as I could. I got the money. ' Here, father, here's the money. I've only spent 50 roubles.' ' Well, that's all right,' he said, ' but now every trifle may count. The time is short. Write a report dated some days ago that you were short of money and had taken 50 roubles on account. I'll tell the authorities you had it in advance.' Well, gentlemen, what do you think? I did write that report too. Well, what then? What happened? How did it end? As soon as I had written the report, gentlemen, this is how it ended. The next day, in the early morning, an envelope with a government seal arrived. I looked at it, and what had I got? The sack, that is, instructions to hand over my work, to deliver the accounts, and to go about my business. How so? That's just what I cried at the top of my voice. How so? Gentlemen, there was a ringing in my ears. I thought there was no special reason for it, but no, the inspector had arrived in the town. My heart sank. It's not for nothing, I thought. And just as I was, I rushed off to Fedosey Nikolaitch. " How is this ?" I said. " What do you mean ?" he said. " Why, I am dismissed." " Dismissed ? How ?"" Why, look at this." " Well, what of it ?"" Why, but I didn't ask for it." " Yes, you did. You sent in your papers on the 1st of April." I had never taken that letter back. " Fedosey Nikolaitch, I can't believe my ears. I can't believe my eyes. Is this you ?"" It is me. Why ?"" My God !"" I'm sorry, sir, I'm very sorry that you made up your mind to retire from the service so early. A young man ought to be in the service, and you've begun to be a little light-headed of late. And as for your character, set your mind at rest. I'll see to that. Your behaviour has always been so exemplary." " But that was a little joke, Fedosey Nikolaitch. I didn't mean it. I just gave you the letter for your fatherly that's all." " That's all ? A queer joke, sir. Does one jest with documents like that ? Why, you are sometimes sent to Siberia for such jokes. Now good bye, I am busy. We have the inspector here. The duties of the service before everything. You can kick up your heels, but we have to sit here at work. But I'll get you a character. Oh, another thing. I've just bought a house from Matveyev. We're moving in a day or two. So I expect I shall not have the pleasure of seeing you at our new residence. Bon voyage." I ran home. " We are lost, Granny." She wailed, poor dear, and then I saw the page from Fedosey Nikolaitch's running up with a note and a bird cage, and in the cage there was a starling. In the fullness of my heart I had given her the starling. And in the note there were the words " April 1st," and nothing more. What do you think of that, gentlemen ? What happened then ? What happened then ? What then ? I met Fedosey Nikolaitch once. I meant to tell him to his face he was a scoundrel. Well ? But somehow I couldn't bring myself to it, gentlemen. End of part 2 and end of Polzunkov by Fyodor Dostoevsky. Recording by Iskra Nikolova. Recording by Iskra Nikolova. Recording by Iskra Nikolova. Recording by Iskra